questions.
Good morning, everyone, and welcome to this meeting of the Eastern Planning Committee, which is one of the 3 area-based planning committees of Dorset Council. Our area of remit covers the previous Purbeck District Council and most of the previous East Dorset District Council areas. For the benefit of the public, I'm Councillor Shane Bartlett, Chairman of this planning committee, due to the fact that our Chairman presently can't be with us this morning. Officers present are Phil Craig, the Solicitor, Tim Cowell, Principal Planning Officer, James Brightman, Planning Case Officer, Lucy Page, Planning Case Officer, Pete Waters, Planning Case Officer, Mike Garrity, Head of Planning, David Northover, Committee Support Officer. Other officers will make themselves known to the meeting when and if they address the committee. Please be aware that this meeting is being live streamed and a copy of the recording of the meeting will be available on the website after this meeting. And by attending this meeting, you consent to being filmed. I would also like to thank the officers behind the scenes who are making this possible. I am pleased to welcome members of the public back into our meeting to listen to the debate and decisions being taken, and that they have the opportunity to address the committee directly in accordance with our procedures, which can be found in the agenda under item 4, public participation, on page 15. We will take the planning applications in order as printed in the agenda. Item 1 on my agenda, apologies for absence. Mr. Northover.
Yes, Chairman. Apologies from Councillors Barron, Coombs, Dyer and Robinson.
Thank you. The first item of business for the committee is the nominations for Vice Chairman of this meeting. Can I have a proposal, please?
Yes, Councillor John Worth, I'd like to propose Councillor Robin Cook for Vice Chairman. Thank you.
Thank you. Do I have a seconder?
Yeah. Councillor David Morgan, second.
Thank you, Councillor Morgan. Councillor Robin Cook, for Vice Chairman of the meeting.
Thank you very much, Chairman.
We'll move to item 2, declarations of pecuniary or other conflict of interest, bias or predetermination. Does any member have anything you wish to declare at this point in the meeting? Councillor Tribe.
Yes, Chairman. Perhaps I should have done it under the last item, but I'm currently on holiday in mid-Devon. Consequently, I would ask if it's okay if I'm excused after item 5 so that I can return. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Tribe. So, moving to item 3 on the agenda, minutes to confirm the minutes of the meeting held on 9th of March 2022. Cover proposal, please. Councillor Worth, thank you. And a seconder, please. Councillor Gorringe, thank you. If there's no dissent, I'll take those minutes as being accepted. Thank you, members. I move to item 4, public participation. I remind members of the public that this is a meeting held in public and not a public meeting. The first 3 members of the public, including any community or amenity group who have registered to speak for and against the application, including the applicant or their representative, maximum 6 in total, will be invited to address the committee. The applicant or their representative registers to speak, then only the first 2 members of the public who wish to speak to the application may address the committee. MPs need to register in the same way and will count as one of the 6 speakers. And parish councillors and ward members of the Dorset Council who are not members of the committee and who wish to address the committee will be allowed to speak, provided they have given due notice. All requests have to be registered with Democratic Services by 8:30 on Monday, 4th of April. Each speaker will be strictly limited to 3 minutes. Are there any representations from the public that do not relate to matters on the agenda today? Mr. Northover.
None received, Chairman.
Thank you. We'll move to item 5, scheduled plan applications. We have 3 plan applications today before us today. Have there been any requests for application deferrals or withdrawals, please?
Mr. Chairman, there have been no requests for withdrawals or deferrals.
Thank you. Background information relating to the applications before us today has been available for inspection by members prior to the meeting, covering consultations, objections and representations, as well as the East Dorset and Purbeck local plans and the council's related policies. We'll just go through the ground rules now. I'll invite the case officer to introduce their item. Members of the public, planning, agents, applicants and town parish councils who have registered to speak will be allowed to address the committee in the following order: public against, public support, applicant or agent, town or parish council, and then the local member. On the public participation section of every item, I will ask the officers if there is any salient points they wish to clarify. I will then open up to the members of the committee for questions first and then a debate to follow. In order to run the meeting, I request that members of the committee direct any remarks and questions through the chair and will invite members to speak in turn. Also remind members that microphones are on mute and ensure that your device volume is set to 0 to maintain audio quality. Please turn your video camera on when invited to speak and use the desk microphone supplied. At the end of the debate, I will take the vote by show of hands. The voting detail will be recorded in the minutes if 3 or more members make the necessary request. I would also advise that due to the technology, there may be a short gap whilst presentations are loaded. So before we move to the planning applications up before us this morning, 2 of the applications are within ward members' areas on this committee. So could I ask Councillor Trite and Councillor Cook whether you wish to take part in the meeting, in the debate and the vote, or whether you wish to speak as ward members and then leave the room? Councillor Trite.
Thank you, Chairman. I wish to take part in the committee's deliberations.
Thank you. Councillor Cook.
Thank you, Chairman. Yes, I confirm that I wish to take part in the committee debate on the item in question. Thank you.
Thank you. So if we move to the first plan application before us this morning, it's 6/2021-0314, demolition of former school buildings and structures, the erection of 90 dwellings, and the formation of a new vehicle access from Norfolk Road at the Purbeck Centre, former grammar school, Norfolk Road, Swanish. The officers give their report, please. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Good morning. This is a planning application before you for the demolition of the former school buildings and structures and erection of 90 dwellings and formation of a new vehicular access from Norfolk Road. The address is Purbeck Centre, also known as the former grammar school on Norfolk Road in Swanish. If I may, just before I get into the main presentation, if I could just provide a few updates for members. After the agenda had been published, the revised plans were submitted and uploaded to the online system. They've been available online for viewing for all. The changes are very minor, slight changes to the parking layout, and none of which are considered to be material to the consideration of this application and require no further consultation, but it's to bring to your attention that if members are minded to approve, there would need to be an update to condition to reflect the updated plans. Also, just to bring to your attention, paragraph 3 of the officer report makes reference to paragraph 14 of the National Planning Policy Framework. Apologies, this should be paragraph 11, paragraph 14 being the previous National Planning Policy Framework version. So that's just to bring that to your attention. So the site, to give some context, is situated in Swanish, in the northern end of Swanish. The entire town of Swanish is covered by the Dorset Area of Outstanding Natural Beauty. Here's the location plan. So the site that's being considered today is this one here. It is situated due east of another development, Compass Point development as it's now known, which is situated here. It's also 90 houses, and that is all but complete. To the south of the site is Days Park, which is public open space, public open space. To the east is Swanish Cricket Club, which can't quite be seen on here. And to the north is St Mary's Primary School and Little Birds Preschool. They're situated to the north here. Just to run you through a few photographs, just as some context, you can see on the site there are materials in the compound. Temporary planning permission was granted for this while Compass Point across the road was completed. So all of this is lawful here, but what you're looking towards to the rear is where the access would be. It's also worth bringing to your attention that the applicant opted to submit a separate planning application for that access road in order to begin some work on it, and I'll explain a bit more why in a moment. So that already has planning permission. So moving on, looking a bit further to the north, as I mentioned, the primary school is situated to the north, so you can see the primary school buildings here and the preschool buildings. and you've got the associated playing fields there. So now looking from the compound across the site, so north, east to south, you're looking towards the former school building, which is to be demolished as part of the proposal. It should be mentioned, I'm going to refer to this as the former school building quite a lot because that's how most people recognise it, but its previous lawful use is actually as an activity centre. It hasn't been a school for some time now, but just for ease, most people still refer to it in that sense. So here's the rear of the building. So we're now looking at the southwest of the site, looking back across the site. So the school building, the former school building, pardon, is here. Now looking across the site to ancillary buildings, which were associated with the activity centre, and then prior to that, to the school itself. And looking a bit further east, so the cricket ground is beyond this tree line. In amongst these trees here is a former outdoor swimming pool. This building is situated midway along the western boundary of the site. It's referred to as the lodge, associated with the former uses. Again, as part of the proposal, this building would be demolished. So looking back across the site from south to north, looking towards again the school in the distance, and then in the middle distance. In the far distance, you can see the Purbeck Ridgeline and Ballard Down. There are public rights of way up there, so there are views to this site from this public rights of way. Just taking you through a few more within the site, as you can see, some of the former ancillary buildings are in a fairly dilapidated state at this point. Again, as the proposal, these buildings would be demolished. Now just showing you Norfolk Road, one I've borrowed from Google here just to show the road width. So again, you've got the school building in the distance here and Ballard Down in the far distance. The access would be at about the point where that lamppost is, give or take. As you can see, Norfolk Road at this point is a two-way street. Again, looking south, and you can see, again, I borrowed this from Google, Compass Point to the right of that photograph was under construction at the time of this photo, but it gives you a bit of context. As I said, that's now all but complete, I believe, and you can see the site under consideration to the left of this photo. So we're looking south here. The school building is hidden slightly behind. This is the lodge here, and then the old school building is beyond that. This is a photograph taken from Days Park, which is the public open space that I referred to the south. As you can see, it's very well screened. All this vegetation is contained within the park itself. And now looking from the cricket pitch, again, I referenced it at the beginning of the presentation, to the east of the site. You can just about make out the top of the building there. Moving on to the Swanish local plan. So this site is an allocated site within the Swanish local plan. The Swanish local plan was adopted in 2017, following the usual consultations. So the Swanish local plan forms part of the development plan, therefore forms part of the decision-making process. Policy SS of the Swanish local plan allocates this site for 90 dwellings. The site across the road is what is now known as Compass Point, which is being built out. And you can see associated with these two sites in two pieces of land that have been given over as suitable alternative natural green space. And that part has been fully implemented. I'll get to the ownership of the site in a minute because it's quite complicated in the ownership history, but effectively in relation to the Compass Point development, most of this site has already been adopted as part of the Compass Point development. There was a sliver of land that was associated with this site, and part of the proposal, and one of the benefits of this proposal would be to incorporate two former pieces of sand land that come from a complicated ownership history into one cohesive sand, which naturally being considered would be to the betterment of providing more suitable mitigation and alternative green space to use in the peatland. So there's a fairly extensive site history. previously, the previous owners had opted to split the site into two parcels. So I'm going to refer to them as the northern and southern parcels, and there's planning history on both of them. So taking the northern parcel first, planning permission was granted at appeal for 52 dwellings. That was the application was submitted in 2013. A reserve matters application was granted with the above layout that came in 2016. That development has been commenced, and part of the rationale of getting permission for the access road is this first bit can be built, and the fallback is that if this application isn't approved, then the one that you see here could be built as is, and so the applicant could use the road that they've already built. So this is extant, the permission has lawfully commenced, and so therefore this could be built out, and that's for 52 dwellings. Moving to the southern part of the site, outline planning permission was granted for 39 dwellings. The application was submitted in 2019. The application itself was granted in 2020. We have not had a reserve access application at this point. However, the outline planning permission hasn't expired, so the principle of development here is established, including the demolition of the school building, the former school building, and the reserve matters, or all matters were reserved by the outline application, but obviously the principle is established for 39 dwellings to go there. So the extant permission, although this is an indicative layout, is that both of these sites could be built out, and that would give a total of 91 dwellings. So that is the applicant's fallback permission. What the applicant has submitted is an integrated scheme, effectively, that brings the whole site together as one instead of two separate schemes. Because if you look at this, although this is an indicative plan, you would have two access points. Although there would potentially be some attempt to provide some cohesiveness in layout, it's not entirely there, and so you've got effectively two separate developments. The proposal would obviously integrate all of the sites and therefore provide a more cohesive layout. So the proposed layout would include one access point here, which I pointed out in the photographs. This doesn't come to the road, it comes near to, but it provides access to these houses here. You'll see in more detail in a minute, there's a green strip of land there to stop people using this as a wraparound, for want of a better way of putting it. So the proposal includes 30 affordable units. That is below the 50% threshold. This is set out in the Poet local plan and the Swanish local plan. This has been established through the previous plan permissions that I referred to. Because of the existing buildings, there's a vacant building credit that can be claimed, and so our housing team are satisfied that this is compliant with policy based on vacant building credit, which is obviously factored in. So there'll be 30 dwellings provided. They're split between affordable rent and shared ownership. As you can see, there's a cluster of affordable units here, but the majority of the units are spread throughout the site. And as you'll see in a moment, the materials palette helps to disguise which units are affordable and which aren't, so they should be relatively tenured lined as well. So in terms of the housing mix, I hope this is clear. Unfortunately, it's quite a lot of information, but I'll take you very quickly through what we've got here. So in open market housing, we have got a mix of 2 to 4 bedroom dwellings, so some of which are apartments, the rest are houses, a mixture of terrace houses, semis and detached. Affordable units, we've got a mix of 1 to 4 bedroom affordable units, and again, a mix of apartments and houses. The housing needs officer is satisfied with the housing mix for affordable units, so it will meet an established need in the area. Moving on to the storey heights of the proposed buildings. The context of the area is that across the way, Campus Point development is predominantly 2-storey development. To the south of that are bungalows, although a number of shallow bungalows, so you've got 1.5-storey development. So the proposal here is predominantly 2-storey. There are a few 3-storey apartment blocks proposed. These are roughly aligned with where the former school building was, albeit the school building was on this alignment, and the apartment blocks are facing more towards the southeast. In terms of relative heights, the apartment blocks would be roughly 1 metre lower than the roof bridge height of the existing building, so they would not exceed or be any more prominent than the existing building. And in terms of the context of this, at present, that former school building is the dominant building in the landscape, because beyond you've got playing fields and what have you. These apartment blocks would be less so, because they'd obviously be surrounded by predominantly two-storey development, which is signified by the red units here. So in terms of materials, again, there's a lot of information here, so I apologise if it's tricky to see. The discussions took place regarding the materials. We are in the A and B, and as I've shown you from the photographs, the site is also in a relatively prominent location, because we're on the northern periphery of Swanish here, albeit a site that's been allocated for development. So the applicant has worked with us on materials and agreed a uniform approach to roofing, so charcoal grey tiles, which is something the A and B officer had requested, as opposed to a mix of roof tiles. In terms of cladding materials, predominantly we're looking at brick, which isn't inappropriate in the area, with Purbeck stone used in certain key locations, the gateway points to the development. So I'll point some of these out to you, because I'm not sure if you'll be able to see them from the plan here, but this dwelling here, for example, would be Purbeck stone. This one up here, which is a corner building, would be Purbeck stone. This one down here and down here. As I mentioned, the materials are designed to make the affordable units tenure blind. So, for example, one of the units to be clad in Purbeck stone is an affordable unit. So this is an indicative landscaping plan. A condition would be applied for further details to be applied. The proposal is to provide a degree of public open space here. This also provides the Suds Pond, which would be used in heavy rainfall events. The landscape architect has no objection to this proposal. It's accepted that where the site is allocated for 90 dwellings, there is going to be limitations as to the amount and extent of landscaping, public open space that can be provided within the development, and so this is considered to be a reasonable compromise, especially considering access to Days Park down here. And one of the requests of the Swanish Town Council, who didn't object to the proposal in the end, was for a pathway to link to Days Park, and you may be able to make out that that's something that the applicant has agreed to, so residents of the development would have easy access to Days Park. There is also a crossing point of the road which would lead straight into the sand as well, so residents would have good and easy access to public open space. Just briefly to show you waste vehicle tracking, no objection from highways about this. The road can be offered up for adoption. Highways have no concerns about the ability for it to be adopted. Obviously, it would be down to the applicant whether they choose to do so, and they've demonstrated that refuse vehicles can access the site. So moving on to give you a few indicative street scenes. This is a view east from Norfolk Road, as if you were seeing effectively in a Compass Point development. This is a street scene, indicative street scene from within the site, so looking towards the open space and Suds Pond. And a few 3D views that the applicant provided as well, just to give an indication. So we're looking at what's in Norfolk Road here. We're looking at the far northern end, and then further in by the access road here. I'll quickly take you through the elevations. I won't dwell on these for too long, because I appreciate there's a lot to get through. These are available on the application page of the website. But this is the elevations of the proposed apartment blocks. The urban design officer has worked with the applicant to work on this design to a point where she considers that they are acceptable. And these are the floor plans. I'll rush through these a little bit. We've got two bedroom end of terrace dwellings here, Rosebery, and similar for Richmond Ellertons are the 3 bedrooms. Moresby are 3 bedrooms again. And some of these, as you can see, are clad in Purbeck stone, again, depending on where they're situated within the development. And these are the detached ones. This is I've used a photo from across the road, so to give you an idea of what's being built at Compass Point. Again, moving on to the Kingsfield, and again, some clad in Purbeck stone and detached ones. These are affordable units, so these are masonettes, so ground floor and first floor flats. And then we're looking at affordable units to houses. So and it's just a very quick run through to give you an idea of what's being proposed. The urban design officer has had no objection to the design. It very much is in line with what has been done over at Compass Point across the road. And the northern end of Swanish is very much the modern end of Swanish. So there's quite a variety of architectural styles and materials employed. So there's no objections on that front. As I said, we worked with the A and B team about ensuring in the wider views that the development sits as well within the landscape as is possible. So the boundary treatment, further condition will be applied to understand the full boundary treatment, but I think the key that I would like to draw your attention to is the proposed boundary treatment for the northern end. Members will be aware that there has been significant concern regarding the proposed boundary with the school. The applicant is proposing 1,800-metre high post or timber fence along this northern perimeter where all the dwellings are situated, and officers are satisfied that that gives both residents and the neighbouring school users and staff a reasonable degree of privacy. Moving on into more detail, the relationship with the school. As I said, there has been significant public interest in this development from people involved with the school to the north. We did receive a petition with over 1,000 signatures, over 400 of which are from the local area. It's worth drawing attention to the fact that in the previous planning application I referred to right back at the beginning of this presentation, that Purbeck District Council, as was, refused an application for the development to the north, and it was allowed at appeal. One of the reasons for refusal given by Purbeck District Council was that they considered that the school and residential development were incompatible uses. And what I've done here is copied in a bit of the appeal inspector's decision where the appeal was allowed, where the appeal inspector has confirmed that in fact they are compatible uses. So I won't read all of this to you, but it says, it seems to me that up and down the country, schools and residential properties are located close together to the benefit of both. He refers to positively integrating, which is part of policy D of the Purbeck local plan. I won't get too much into this because he's talking about the impact on the residents and saying if you choose to live immediately adjacent to a school, you have to accept that there will be a degree of noise by living next to a school. But he said it effectively, if we were to refuse the application, the logical extension of the council's position must be that schools are to be positioned away from residential areas with all the greater consequential travel times and social isolation associated with that. So I think it's worth drawing that to your attention. There has been significant concern. However, an appeal inspector has concluded for this site that the uses aren't incompatible. And one of the concerns raised by local residents is during the construction process, the noise and the dust that has been generated. The applicant, in seeking to address that, has submitted a construction management plan which the environmental health team have looked at in detail. The environmental health team is satisfied that this is sufficient to overcome any harm caused. It has to be said that it's anticipated there will be a degree of noise and dust that we understand that's a kind of inevitable aspect of development taking place. However, the measures that have been put in place, the environmental health team consider are sufficient to reduce that impact. And it's things such as timber at the other end of the site, for example, using water to suppress dust during the summer. regular washdowns. All of those details are available on the planning application file. So officers therefore consider that, subject to a condition requiring that construction management plan to be implemented, that the construction process would not be unduly harmful to the immunity of the neighbouring school. So coming to a conclusion, in terms of principle of development, the site is situated within the settlement boundary, and as I pointed out, is an allocated site, and therefore it's considered to be acceptable. The scale and design and impact on the area in the Dorset AONB are also considered to be acceptable, and the AONB team confirmed that. Subject to conditions on boundary treatment, the construction management plan, the impact on the neighbouring amenities considered to be acceptable. The housing needs team are satisfied with the affordable housing provision. I should have mentioned the site was formerly part of the sports pitch, part of the former school. Sports England were consulted and have raised no objections. That pitch has been reallocated, so by the building of the school to the north, you provide a further pitch. The pitch doesn't necessarily have to be available for public use to meet the planning policy requirements. In terms of access and parking, that's considered to be acceptable, and the drainage scheme is also suitable. In terms of biodiversity in Dorset heathlands, the previously approved sands opposite the site provide suitable heathlands mitigation subject to Section 106 legal agreement requiring the integrated sand management plan. So you have, instead of two separate sands, you have one that works together as an integrated whole, which provides a betterment and makes it easier for people to access and use. Suitable biodiversity mitigation has been provided in the form of a bat roost and other mitigation on the site, which the Natural Environment team was satisfied with. And this being the case, officers recommend that the committee grant the application subject to the conditions set out in the officer report and subject to the completion of a satisfactory planning obligation to secure the affordable housing as mentioned and appropriate sand management, or if the Section 106 is not signed, to refuse permission if the Section 106 is not completed by the 6th of October 2022, or such an extended time as agreed by the head of planning. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Walters, for a very good presentation. I'll move now to my public speaking. And first members of the public to speak for objection, I have Ms. Sophie Holbrook and Ms. Carla Danish.
Carla to start.
Certainly. Sorry, I cannot allow that. Can you take them away, please? Can you take them away, please? Thank you.
Sorry, still some photos we're missing.
Okay, thank you. Ms. Danish, if you press the button on the right of the microphone stand, if you remember to turn it off when you leave the table, please. Thank you. I should say you have 3 minutes.
Thank you. My name is Carla Dinesh. I'm a mother of a preschooler at Little Birds and I'm also a committee member. I'm here on behalf of the team because they couldn't make it because they had some very important meetings with social services. So the school have asked me to convey, the preschool have asked me to convey the following points. They feel that no consideration of the existing preschool has been made in the plan despite this preschool having been established whilst the protracted planning process of the site has developed. The rear windows, and they're the main windows apart from the doors, to the preschool are now looked directly in by the new buildings that are right there, and it looks directly into the nappy changing and the toilet area for the children. The preschool has wide bifold doors, and we had some images we wanted to show you because there were no images from inside and from the side of the preschool for you to see, so that's what we wanted to show you. They have bifold doors which are open daily to encourage the children to be able to go inside and outside as they please, as part of the preschool's policy. And there will obviously be increased noise and dust from the build in their immediate in their play space because it is half a metre to a metre from the fence line. The noise impacts social communication and speech and language during a crucial neurodevelopmental stage in the children, and it can impact their full educational journey and limit their life choices. This will impact the children. We have a number of SEND children who have sensory issues, and the experience will heightened it will affect them quite badly, the noise. I've experienced the noise myself when I'm there, and your chest actually physically vibrates, which is quite intense. We also have quite a few vulnerable families where the children do not have, it's their main time to be outside at preschool, it's their playtime, their outdoor time. So this will be impacted. They do not get much of that in their home time. It's a very important time for them. The dust that will come from the build, which we know happens, it's going to require increased cleaning of the preschool play equipment and the area. We believe it to be a hazard to the children who have breathing issues when they're outside playing regularly. The building site is on the southwest side of the site, which is the prevailing wind direction. So I think, I won't say numbers, a lot of the time the wind blows straight over the site onto the preschool and the school itself. The primary light bringing windows run the length of the building on the side facing the building site. These windows will be blocked for light for a lot of the build, and also it will decrease once the building is finished. Decreased natural light will impact on children in both terms of vitamin D intake, and artificial lighting will have to be increased, and it takes financial resources to run the lights, as we all know, the increased electricity. What we are asking for is that proper provision is made for damping down the dust on site for the building. This is monitored.
Mr. Nash, I need you to round it up now because you've had your 3 minutes.
Can I say my last few things?
Is it just a couple of seconds, is it?
It'll be a few seconds. We would like as much to happen in the summer holidays when the children aren't there. We would like some kind of green screen. We'd like a special contractor to monitor the dust levels, which hasn't been done as far as we know. And we would like the development to be deferred until appropriate safety measures are in place, but not against the houses. We just want the preschool and children not to suffer.
Thank you, Mr. Nash.
Sorry for taking it.
I'm here to represent the parents who send their children to Little Birds. I think it's an oversight, the pictures that were shown by Peter, because they do not show you the view from Little Birds, which, I might add, is under 0.5 metre. So that is a true oversight, and it is significant they've not been shown to you. I want to show you the pictures so you can see the proximity of the site earmarked for construction. The building work will happen so close to the school, less than 0.5 metre. Imagine a ruler, a 30-centimetre ruler. That's the size we're talking about. Children will be exposed to all of the particles being blown across. Research has proven that particles less than 10 micrometers in diameter cause aggravated asthma and other respiratory conditions. Health UK's guidance on air pollution states clearly that particulates matter, including wind-blown soil and dust, i.e. the kinds of things from a building site. This can cause great risk because it's drawn deep into the lungs. With a prevailing southwesterly wind, these toxic particulates will be breathed in by our children who play innocently outside in a space where they should be safe. The barriers with the fence that separates the preschool and the building site is not robust enough. It does not stop the high levels of dust and toxic particles. You would have seen from the pictures, had you allowed me to show everybody here, that fence is already leaning over and it's not been fitted properly. This is alarming. The fence needs to be higher. It also needs a 3 metre plus debris netting attached to the upper part of the fence to add extra protection. To mitigate dust, pollution and dirt, Barratt should create a green space. In their first planning application, there was a green space. It was included, it was then removed in the later applications, and we believe it should still be there to protect our children. The preschool offers Montessori provision. This means a focus on outdoor activities. Obviously, heavy building work will impact on the children's play and an entitlement of outside time. We feel this is unfair and wrong. There are going to be children who will be dealing with 4 years of this who attend St Mary's. This is shocking. There is no evidence of Barratt carrying on with any air quality assessment. And through our research sent to Peter Walters, we uncovered that actually the regulations are not as strong here as they are in other parts of the country. I think I've said all that I need to.
Thank you, Ms. Holbrook. Can you turn the microphone on, please? Thank you. I now move, I have no public support speakers, so I now move to the applicant, Mr. James Cross for Barrett Homes. And you have 3 minutes, Mr. Barrett. Sorry, Mr. Cross.
No, not Mr. Barrett, so the Good morning, members, and thank you for allowing me to speak on behalf of Barrett David Wilson Homes in favour of this application. My name is James Cross, and I'm the head of planning at Barrett David Wilson in Southampton. The site has been the subject of extensive previous planning applications and currently has consent for 91 units across 2 approved applications. The application before you today benefits from 10 months of extensive post-submission feedback with officers and follows a combination of detailed pre-application process, liaison with local groups and members. Through a careful, considered and diligent approach, we are pleased that the application is presented to committee today with an officer recommendation for approval. The site is identified in policy SS of the local plan as being suitable for development of 90 dwellings. The application has been designed having full regard to both the character of Swanish and our existing Compass Point Phase 1 development. Through close and continued work with officers, the development has evolved in a manner which is considered to be wholly compatible with the existing development. Officers have fully assessed the application's impact on the Airbnb and have concluded that the development would not result in impacts that would affect the Airbnb. We note concerns raised by local groups in respect to the proximity of the site to the adjacent school. However, officers are clear in their recommendation in that, this is a quoting from their report, that it is commonplace for schools to be located adjacent to residential properties, and the proposed screening of the properties on the northern edge of the site will provide an acceptable degree of privacy for both the users of the schools and the residents of the dwellings. And this is a position which is clarified and confirmed by the inspector in the planning histories on the site. We've listened to and worked with the parents group who have raised concerns which have resulted in amendments to the boundary treatments. A further offer of additional soft landscaping on the school side has been made outside of the planning process. We're waiting details of that. We therefore respectfully request that members support the application today and resolve to grant planning permission in accordance with the recommendation to committee. In considering this proposal, we ask that members acknowledge that the development will deliver a number of public benefits, including delivery of 30 affordable homes, the generation and payment of £1.85 million in silver receipts, the generation of new homes bonus for the first 6 years of the development, and the generation of ongoing council tax for expenditure towards public services, and such public services include education and learning, communities and public health, and child social care.
30 seconds, Mr. Cross.
We hope that the positive and proactive approach that has been undertaken from the officers and Barrett David Wilson Homes enables members to support this application today. Thank you very much for your time, and I'm happy to answer any questions you may have.
Thank you. There will be no questions. Thank you. I now move to our next speaker, which will be the ward member, Councillor Gary Sutton, who's requested to speak.
Thank you. Nice to see you all in person. Okay, so I know the site very well. I was at the grammar school in the very last year that it was open, and as I left, it closed, but I don't think you can blame me for that. It's taken almost 5 decades to bring this housing to this site. I applaud Barrett's for assembling the site, and in particular, the 30 houses are absolutely essential to Swanish as affordable units. However, in that time, there's been a significant change to the site, and that has been the building of the school and the preschool. And as the residents have quite rightly pointed out, we believe there's inappropriate screening between the site and the school, and in the construction stage, we believe there's inappropriate methods that do not take into account the significant amount of dust and building materials that will be swept onto the site. Bear in mind, on one site, you have a man in virtual hazmat suit cutting up bricks, and on 1 metre away, you have a young child playing. That's what we're talking about, young children's health. And you have to bear in mind, not everybody's always right. 50 years ago, it was fine to play in asbestos dust. And now we know what happened. They're quite right in saying that there are major concerns, health issues over children breathing in building materials, dust, etc. The screening is insufficient. During the build, it needs to be much higher and it needs to protect the school and the preschool. And I'm asking you to do that. In reality, the best thing to do would be to defer this and come and look at the site yourself so that you could see just how close these houses are to this school. Very important. Secondly, when the houses are built or will be built, the overlooking is inappropriate. Something has to be done. You should take measures to do that. There's also, I'm very surprised about the highways. Right outside the school, there is, just around the corner of Washington Lake, it moves to the national speed limit. It seems ironic that we're going to allow all of these people to live and right next to school and inappropriate speeding. Also, access to the school from the far side could be dealt with by additional pathways from Oldwell Road into the site. I believe the town council would be very keen to see that. In essence, I'm asking you to defer for a site visit so you can really see what we're talking about. The ladies here did have some photos which really would help.
30 seconds, Councillor.
Okay, so that's my proposal to you, that I would hope that you would consider this very carefully. More screening, overlooking, highways, pathways. Come and have a look. You're not going to see it from Whitbourne. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Suttle. We'll now ask the officers if there's any clarifications they wish to make on the points that have been raised.
Thank you, Chair. If I could take you back through the presentation and just remind members of the scheme that has already been approved and therefore is the fallback position. You will see that the buildings are located immediately adjacent to the preschool. And so that is the fallback decision that we're considering here in terms of the principle of developing on this site. That principle has been established, excuse me, beg your pardon, and it could be implemented ultimately. The applicant could choose to implement this planning permission and there'd be no impediments from doing so. I'll just draw your attention, hopefully you can see from the layout here, there was some reference to the windows and the bifold doors opening and looking onto the site. So there are no houses. You can probably see from this drawing here, this is the preschool building itself. There are no houses that look directly onto that building. The nearest is number 9, but that opens up into terrace. These are in fact garages. So that is the amount of
compared to the previous project.
Yeah, so just taking you back to the previous plan, you've got a similar arrangement there with the garages overlooking, and you've also got the terrace of houses there. In terms of the boundary treatment, taking you back to the slide I had for that, which I believe is right near the end. 1.8 metre high close boarding timber fence will be more than sufficient for when the children are out playing outside, that you won't be able to see them from the gardens of the neighbouring properties, and equally the residents of the neighbouring properties will have their privacy maintained. In terms of the dust management and concerns about the construction process, the environmental health team were heavily involved in this, and they're satisfied with the construction management plan, as I mentioned. I know Councillor Suttle made reference to cutting materials next to the school, but in fact the management plan explicitly states that cutting materials has to take place to the south of the site, for example. So it's a very detailed management plan. It is available for everyone to see, and the environmental health team are satisfied that will provide a suitable degree of mitigation during the construction process. It's obviously true to say that you cannot completely remove all dust from the site and all noise from the site, but the measures that are being proposed and put forward by the applicant are considered to be sufficient. and therefore officers recommend a planning condition. And it is, as I mentioned in the presentation, the appeal inspector has established that schools and residential areas being located next to each other are not incompatible uses. In fact, my understanding of what happened here is that because of the change in the school system, the school came first at the same time as the plan was being drawn up. So it's, in many situations, you'd end up with a housing coming before the school, and in this instance, that hasn't happened. But it's worth making clear that this is an allocated site in the Swanish local plan, which forms part of the development plan. So there is an acceptance that Swanish local plan went through the normal consultation, had to be adopted, went through examination by inspectors, and all that process that has to go through before being adopted. And so therefore the principle is considered to be acceptable, and the inspector has established specifically for this site that the relationship isn't considered to be unacceptable. I don't think there's anything else that we want to add at this point. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Walters. Ms. Carroll, did you wish to add anything?
No, I think that Mr. Walters has adequately covered the points raised. Thank you.
Thank you. In which case, I'll move to the members. If there are any questions or points of clarification you wish to make at this point, then I'll move into the debate afterwards. Councillor Tribe.
Yes, thank you, Chairman. I'm slightly confused in view of what the officers have just said in respect of some kind of barrier. I don't want anyone here to underestimate the degree of concern there is locally about the risks of safeguarding as a result of the school being cheek by jowl with the houses. Now, is there a fence going to be built? I mean, one suggestion has been that there should be a trees along there. I know that would take time anyway, but is there a high fence, and is it suitably high enough? You mentioned 1.8 metres. Is that in this connection?
Thank you, Chair. Yes, so the applicant is proposing a 1.8 metre high timber fence. So that is in old money about 6 foot. So, I mean, there has to be a balance between, obviously, if you go to 3 metres, you would end up making a fortress-like development there. So 1.8.
Imagine that 1.8 metres, though, would enable overlooking from some of the houses.
From the ground floor, you wouldn't. 1.8 metres. If you're in the garden, I mean, most people, 1.8 metres is more than sufficient.
But from the first floor? Or? From
the first floor there, yes, there could be a degree of overlooking, but I think I'd refer you back to that inspector's conclusion that there are not incompatible uses here.
The distance.
And also, in terms of the school building, it's actually backing onto the garage blocks, not the houses. So the playing field beyond, yes, you would be able to, in theory, be on the first floor and look across the playing field. But the inspector's decision is clear, and there are plenty of examples in this area of schools and residential properties being built side by side. So 1.8 metres is considered by officers to be sufficient.
I have to question that. I don't think it is. But anyway, thank you. You've clarified the point I was anxious to do.
Did you wish to come back, Councillor Tribe?
Well, I did have 1 or 2 others, but I was going to pass to another member.
Okay, I'll come back to you so you can make thank you. The next speaker is Councillor Took.
Thank you, Chair. A couple of issues interest me about this. First of all, I just want to say I am actually quite concerned about this dust and the screening issues, which I hadn't appreciated from reading the report earlier. However, the questions I want is, first of all, in paragraph 1518, I think it is, make reference to NPPF 177. NPPF 177 says there must be exceptional circumstances and it must be in the public interest. I think the public interest issue was covered in the report, but I don't recall any mention of what those exceptional circumstances are. And the requirement is for both of them. It's exceptional circumstances and public interest, not all. So I'd like to know what those exceptional circumstances are. And secondly, if I may, affordable housing. We've made a great deal of affordable housing, 30 units here.
Okay, sorry.
We've made a great deal of the affordable units here, but there's only going to be 30 of them as opposed to what we would like is 45 at least. That would be half the cost. Understand why. But we've had a number of cases in the past where developers, having had planning permission, have suddenly found unexpected costs and come back to try and say, look, we can't afford to put these affordable units in. How convinced are we that the sums in this case add up and that there is very little danger of developers coming back and being unable to afford to put the affordable housing in place? Because that would be a great shame if that were to happen. So does the calculation of costs and profits mean that we're happy that this is a viable development? So those are the two questions. I'd like a little bit of clarification. Thank you.
You need to come back on that.
Thank you, Councillor Took. It's the viability issue as part of that. So, finance, please.
I'll try and find the button.
Don't use mine.
I found it. Thank you, Chair. On the first point, members, if I can just explain, paragraph 177 of the NPPF does talk about major development and exceptional circumstances. The difference here is that principle of development has already been established by the outline of reserve matters already granted on the site. So you're not going back to first principles. You do have the principle of development on the site has been approved through the outline and reserve matters application that already exists so that they could build out. With regard to the with regard to the issue of viability, I'll let Peter answer that because he's prompting me there and he's got it written down. So thank you.
Through the chair, if I may. So the applicant has not submitted a viability appraisal to say they cannot provide the full quota of affordable housing. That's not the test here. Where there is vacant building credit, they're entitled to apply that. They don't have to demonstrate viability at all. So it's not a case that we've gone through a viability process as we have on previous applications and the district valuer has concluded that's all they can afford. They're applying the vacant building credit, which they have the right to do because of the buildings on site to reduce the amount of affordable housing provided. In terms of could they come back in future, the answer is in theory, but it would be subject to the same process that any such application would be, that we would require them to provide a full viability appraisal. They would have to pay the district valuation service to assess that, and we'd be guided from that. I mean, that is true of any planning application we get. We can't prohibit them from doing it. There's no reason to think that that is going to happen. I mean, I know Compass Point across the road, as far as I'm aware, that was delivered with policy compliant affordable housing. Because it's not a viability process that we've gone through here, the applicant has never stated that that is an issue for this site. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Saturday, Mr. Took. You should come back.
I'd like to come back if I may.
Certainly.
When you say that the exceptional circumstances are required because the principle of development has already been approved, presumably when that earlier application was dealt with, we understood what the exceptional circumstances were in that case, because presumably nothing has changed with the need for exceptional circumstances. So what were those exceptional circumstances?
Members, it's as Peter explained during his presentation, we have a plan-led system. Policy SS of the Swanish local plan. The site is allocated within that local plan for development. The site allocation identifies the site for 90 houses. That went through an examination with an inspector. The forward was all examined during the local plan process. So at the point that we come to the development management aspect of the scheme, you have a site here that's allocated in your local plan. Your system is plan-led. You have a site allocation. You've also got the fallback position of a scheme for 90 houses. So we're not here to look at the first principles. We're here to look at whether or not the scheme on the site is appropriate for that site in terms of its layout and form, and that's why it's before you today. But the principle of development on the site has been established through the local plan process, and you have an allocated local plan policy within your Swanish local plan, which identifies the site for 90 houses. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Cowell. This last time,
Just for clarity, so the fact that it's in a local plan of itself makes it an exceptional circumstance. It doesn't quite sound accurate, but if you reassure me on that point, I'll be happy.
Ms. Cowell, I'm satisfied that we're following policy and procedures as laid out in the local plan.
It's a plan-led system. The local plan identifies the site for housing, and the scheme is for housing. So there's no contradiction with the local plan policy for this site.
Ms. Brenton.
Thank you. I have several small questions. That's all right. One of is could the officer please go back to, it wasn't the boundary trees, I think it's either before or just after the slide which shows the planting, the soft landscaping on the site. I didn't jot down the number. There we are. That's the one. 27. Okay. There seems to be a query. First of all, first point, there seems to be a query about this attenuation pond. Is it a pond? Is it a sump? Does it class as green open space? Because I don't know, you might fall in and knock it out again. There seems to be a bit of a query about that one, so I'd like a bit of explanation on that. The other bit is looking at that plan. Fine, you have trees to be planted alongside the main roadside, but would it be possible to negotiate with the developers and instead of the garages which abut the fence which is close to the preschool, could that be a green space with some taller trees planted there, which would help on sort of cleaning the air side of it and noise reduction side of it? I know, yes, you lose a couple of garages, but there's not that many garages on this site, so they're a bit of an exception up there, isn't it? So that's another question. And the other one, which I'd like to put to the officer, is bearing in mind this is a new site, a new development, and we are dealing with a leading developer in the country. Were the questions asked about why not put solar tiles on some of these roofs? Why do we have to do the traditional? I mean, I know we can't enforce it, but I would have liked to know that there had been a very good discussion about why no solar tiles, what's happening to rainwater harvesting on these properties. I'm assuming that they'll be built beautifully, but that's a question I'd like to ask. And the other bit is there was a passing reference to a bat roost, but I was wondering whether discussions or questions have been asked of the developer about things like swallow birdhouses or bee bricks being put into these properties. Bearing in mind you're starting from scratch, you can build whatever you want these days. So surely we should be asking these questions, even if we can't enforce. And I think that's sort of getting to the end of my list. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Brenton. And I know you're a champion of renewable energies and new developments, and you did sneak that in. I noticed, it didn't escape me. If you could answer, please.
Thank you, Chair. I'll try and take these points in order that they seem, starting with, excuse me, sorry, the landscaping, attenuation pond. So that is this here for clarity. It's supposed to serve as both. Excuse me, sorry, I've got forgotten for it. It's supposed to serve as both. So drainage systems now should, where possible, be designed to also provide public community and open space. And I've been advised that so long as the gradient of the sub-pond does not exceed a 1 in 3 gradient, it can be used as public open space. Now, it's the design of the drainage scheme as a whole would mean that the pond would only act as a pond in high rainfall events. So, in other words, when we don't have significant rainfall, it would be dry. It would be a dry basin. And it would only be in those rainfall events that it would be filled to a maximum of 1.3 meters. So that's the rationale behind it. So the intention is to serve as both, and the drainage engineer, when I spoke to him about this, said that that's something that they're working towards, where it's possible to achieve, and it isn't always possible to achieve, that a drainage scheme should not just be purely functional, but should try and work in accordance with providing some open space as well, and obviously on a case-by-case basis that has to be considered. The landscape plan, taking your second point, is indicative. That said, obviously, where there is a condition for a landscaping plan, if members are minded to approve this application, obviously that wouldn't entail the movement of any buildings, because that would require a material change to the layout. What it is worth pointing out is that on the approved scheme, there are also garages in this area as well. So we already have a situation where that can occur. But in terms of landscaping in general, what you see is not necessarily the final, the final position of the trees and what have you. The suds pond will be there because it needs to be. But in terms of the landscaping that you see around, that is open to further discussion. In terms of solar tiles and renewables, the A&B officer was concerned about the wider views from the A&B and has asked for slate grey tiles to be used. And it is worth pointing out that we don't have any policy that requires the applicant to provide it, although obviously we encourage it where possible. The back roof is down in this corner. There is other mitigation. I haven't gone through it, the whole mitigation. I'm trying to give a snapshot of the flavour here. It is all set out in the biodiversity mitigation plan, and the back roof is, if you like, the main feature, but not the only feature. Off the top of my head, I couldn't honestly answer you as to all the other features that are proposed, but it is not simply the back roof. That was just one that I chose to draw out in summarising. Going back to the solar tiles as well, we have to make sure that it meets the building regs in terms of energy efficiency, so that will come into play as well. I think those were the points that you raised. Thank you.
Ms. Prentice, wish to come up?
Yes, if I can. Thank you for that. But actually, the other question that's on, which I missed because I got diverted with batteries, I'm afraid, was, could you just clarify what the speed limits are on the roads nearby? Where does, I assume Norfolk Road is 30 miles an hour, but where does it start? And I'm thinking in terms of the walking routes to the Swanish school or back into town. Are the pavements and safe crossings all the way through? Because people don't always walk the way you think they would. I'm just concerned because we have had several cases in the last year where we agreed something, it seemed fine, and then later on said, but why didn't we sort out the highways before we actually agreed it? So I would just like it, to be sure that it is fine all the way around.
Thank you, Chair. So the speed limit along Norfolk Road is 30 miles an hour till beyond the school. It then goes to national speed limit. Beyond that point, you come to a mini roundabout with Wash Pond Lane going off to your left and your right. I forget the name of the lane that goes straight on, but at that point, the road narrows to single track and there isn't a pavement, but you're going away from the town. Going back towards the town, you may be able to see from this photograph, there is an existing pavement that actually widens out. I've walked it And in a former life, I used to work further down Norfolk Road, so I can say from experience that there is a pavement all the way into the town there. There is a pelican crossing as you head into the town, so it is entirely possible to walk down Norfolk Road, which brings you almost into the town, and then cross safely to access the town. There is also, as part of the proposal, let me go back to the landscape. As a proposed layout, beg your pardon. There is also proposed to be a footpath into Days Park, which would provide another pedestrian access towards the town. You could walk through Days Park should you so wish. That would bring you out nearer to the beach, and you could walk that way into town as well. So it is entirely possible to safely walk. The pavements are of a sufficient width to walk along Norfolk Road or through Days Park into the town. So officers have no concerns about that. And as I said, the speed limit past this site and beyond the school is 30 miles an hour. So there isn't a 30-mile-an-hour speed limit in place. Thank you.
No, carry on.
Thank you. I do have you down to speak for a minute, Councillor Trent. Just further to the biodiversity and mitigation. Obviously, there's quite an extensive report on that. I spent to make a point about bee bricks and bird boxes. I appreciate you haven't got the information in front of you to cover that, but I wonder if that could be a condition.
Thank you, Chair. So there is a mitigation plan that has been approved by the Natural Environment team. So just to be clear, the officers who are appointed to look at this have looked at mitigation and the possibility of enhancements and are satisfied with the biodiversity mitigation that has been put forward. That plan will be available online. Off the top of my head, I can't remember all of the details of it. The back roofs, if you like, is the headline because there are bats in the former school building. And so a purpose-built bat roofs will be provided for them in close proximity to trees in Days Park, which the Natural Environment team, who are the council's experts on these matters, are satisfied with.
Thank you, Mr. Waters.
Sorry, can I just add? Sorry, Chairman.
Mr. Garrity.
Yeah, I was just to say that there was a condition on the recommended in the report that deals with the biodiversity mitigation plan as well. Just for your awareness. Thank you.
Thank you. My next speakers will be Councillor Cook, Councillor Trott, Councillor Worth. So, Councillor Cook.
Thank you, Chairman. A couple of questions at this stage. One is perhaps confusion on my part, but I'd like a bit more clarity on if you can put the slide up of the extant planning permission that was granted in 2013. Is that possible, please? Right. Now, this is my thought process. If I'm wrong, please tell me so. If this application we've got today for the 90 houses were refused, those 52 have been approved in outline and reserve matters. Am I correct so far? So the layout will be as the developer could go ahead and build that out as shown on that slide. Okay, I've got that. That was granted probably during or prior to the time that the school was developing and so on, because that was 2013 up to 2016. Okay. Now, going to the current application slide, if we can, I'll sort of throw you a bit on different slides here. But now, they rejigged on the reserve matters, they've rejigged the layout to take into account, as far as I can see, would that be right, of the impact on the school? Because the garages are there in a different location and they set the properties further back. So the developer has worked, I presume, to mitigate to a degree the impact on the school. Would I be right in asking that question? But if we say no to this and we could justify not granting it, then we could end up with the 52 in the way it's laid out there. So that's my first question.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, that is the fallback. That layout is approved. They could put space in the ground, start tomorrow. So if the application before us is refused and an option available to the applicant is to build this out, and it is considered to be commenced. I forget what work was done, but it's been commenced legally, so that planning permission doesn't expire. So that is the fallback for the northern part of the site, and as you can see, the garage block here is right on the border of the preschool as well. So with the proposal that we're looking at, the houses nearest the school, which are these, you can see the gardens are significantly longer to try and place them further away to reduce the potential impact of overlooking, and then the applicant is agreeing to a 1.8 metre high boundary fence as well, which, as I said in my report, officers consider to be appropriate and a reasonable solution in considering this. Chair.
Thank you.
Okay. Well, I have got a second question actually, but yes, thank you, Peter, for that. That's how I understood it, but I just wanted to clarify it to everybody here as well. Thank you. Second question is, and I heard the concerns about the construction issues. And I think they're very, very valid concerns, actually. I really do. And we've heard what the have had to say on this. Being a parent and a grandparent, I can understand the concerns for the youngsters in that location while the building is going on. Now, we're advised that there's a very tight management construction plan, and I'm probably content that there is, and the experts have done their job. But where is the control of that? Where is the enforcement? Where does that come from, please, if that construction management plan is not being adhered to? Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. As with any potential breach of planning regulation or planning permission, it would be through our enforcement officers. If someone reported a potential breach, we have a dedicated planning enforcement team who would investigate that and could take any action as deemed necessary if it was found that a breach had occurred. Environmental health will also be very aware of this one. So aside from the planning regulation, there will be requirements from the environmental health statutory. They've got their own statutory system and laws in place. And so again, if it's considered there's a breach of that construction management plan, it may be that the environmental health team also choose to investigate. Obviously, I can't speak for them, but that potential is there.
Okay, well, thank you for that. That has actually put my mind at rest that we have got that degree of control and that we can see how it moves forward if it were granted. That's all the questions, really. If I can come back later, maybe in the debate, Chairman, please. Thank you.
The next speaker is Councillor Trout.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I heard three very brief questions, but if I may, just a point of information first. When Councillor Brenton asked a question about local speed limits, it completely slipped the officer's mind that we're not just talking about Norfolk Road, we are talking about Washpond Lane, which runs along one side of the school in the way that Norfolk Road runs along the front of it. And it's a key element in this discussion, in this whole application, because the effect of the houses, the new houses, will be to put a lot more traffic, a lot more people on that road. And that road, for the greater part of its length, is subject only to national speed limits. And traffic sometimes speeds along there, not most of it, but it does happen sufficiently enough to be a cause of great concern to local people, and particularly to the town council. So not only is it national speed limit, i.e. 60 miles an hour, there are no pavements, the sight lines are very poor as well. So it's a very potentially dangerous place. And I will certainly come on to this when we come to the actual discussion. But I want to point that out as a matter of interest, because Washpond Lane is at least as important in our deliberations, in my judgment, as Norfolk Road is. My points I wanted to raise were, will vehicular and pedestrian entrances to the new housing estate be moved further south. Now, this was a particular concern of the town council, and I apologise if it has and it's escaped my notice, but has the vehicular and pedestrian entrance to the new housing estate been moved further south? Since, as planned, they are very close indeed to the primary school and the preschool, and we don't think they should be. My second question is, St Mary's School is at full capacity, so I do wonder where the children from the new estate are supposed to go to primary school, but are officers aware that in the Barrett's text, it states that it is a 10-minute walk to the nearest secondary school. It is a 10-minute walk to the nearest private secondary school, which happens to deal with special educational needs. It is half an hour's walk to our public secondary school, which is the Purbeck School at Hurston. It's a half an hour's walk, not 10 minutes. Again, I suppose that's a point of interest, but I would like you to be aware of it. My final question is that present Compass Point development on the western side of Norfolk Road has a 12 or 13 acre SAN. Now, this new site, for the same number of houses, has only a 2.5 acre SAN. Should they be similar, or was the SAN that was developed on the western side too big for the western side, and was it developed with an eye towards also being the SAN, or at least a big element of SAN, for the eastern side, the side we're discussing as well? Are you able to answer that? There's a huge disparity between the SAN on the west and the SAN on the east. So either one is far too big, or the other one is far too small, or the first one, the big one, was built with a view to being, at least in part, a SAN for the area that we are now discussing.
Thank you, Councillor Tribe. Mr. Walters, Councillor, please.
Thank you, Chair. Again, I'll try and take these in the order that they were raised. So referring to Washpond Lane, I wonder if I can show you for members who may not be as familiar. If you can see, is the road that runs along here. So it's on the periphery of Swanish. It is national speed limit. If residents were heading to Swanish, they're unlikely to go along Washpond Lane. You would head down Norfolk Road, which leads into the town centre. It's worth pointing out the highways team haven't raised any objection in terms of the increased traffic generation as a result of this development in terms of the pressure on Washpond Lane. And as I said, if you want to access the facilities within Swanage, you have a pedestrian access into Swanage. In terms of the entrances to the site, so in terms of pedestrian entrances, you can access the site from here, and from here this leads straight onto the pavement, also from here, as well as the access road. The access road has been approved as part of the application that was submitted, so the access road going to this point already has planning permission, and so isn't something that we can revisit at this point, but it's worth noting that the Highways Authority had no concerns regarding that access. In terms of the school location, secondary school, there is one secondary school in Swanage. 30 minutes walk isn't considered to be unreasonable, and that's considered normal in policy terms. Moving on to the SAN, which is most complex of the issues insofar as there is quite a complicated planning history of this. As you can see, the Swanish local plan allocated this land, the SAN land, for both of these sites, and arguably this one down here, but certainly these two sites. So the Compass Point development delivered the majority of that SANG. Natural England are satisfied that the combination of those two SANGs, and as I mentioned in the presentation, this southern SANG currently is split into two parcels of land, which Councillor Tritus referred to, one of which is significantly bigger than the other. Natural England previously allowed this smaller SANG for the northern development, so it accepted that that was sufficient, and then accepted for the southern development that so long as these two parcels of land work together as a cohesive whole, that would be acceptable. Now, the planning history of this predates my time at Dorset Council, so truthfully I can't tell you the conversations that have taken place years and years ago, but what I can say is that Natural England are satisfied that they would work cohesively as a whole, and the Swanish local plan has set that out quite clearly, that this is the land to be allocated for use as a SANG, and that's what's happened.
Thank you, Mr. Councillor Trott, you satisfied with that?
If I could just come back in respect to Wash Pond Lane. This is absolutely fundamental to our deliberations today, because pupils with their parents walk along Wash Pond Lane to the school, coming from Ulwell Road. Now, if you look at the map, you'll find that residents and children coming to the school would come along Ulwell Road. It's not advisable to do so, but human nature being what it is, I'm afraid that's what people do. And this development will mean there'll be a lot more people doing that, and a lot more cars there to interfere with people doing that. There are no pavements, sight lines are poor, it's national speed limit. And that's a concern that has preoccupied those of us with detailed knowledge of this whole area. It has preoccupied us for months, trying to come up with an alternative to Wash Pond Lane. And it's vital that we do so before this build goes ahead and we end up with a dead child along there. And that is why so much effort is being put into this. It's complicated, which is another reason why a site visit is so important for members of this committee, because it involves not just the Dorset Council and the Town Council. It involves the cricket club, the former Allmat Centre. It involves Barracks themselves and the school. We have got somehow to get a footpath that can be used, and which the school can approve of. The route that we originally had, the school wouldn't, because of the risks to pupils along there. But an alternative pedestrian route between the school and Ulwell Road is essential before this goes ahead. And that is the significance of Wash Pond Lane.
Thank you, Councillor Chair.
Thank you, Chair. So I think it's worth saying that the proposals that Councillor Trott is putting forward for a pavement would go beyond the scope of what this development is looking to deliver, in terms of you're looking to mitigate any impact of having housing here, and if you lived here there would be no need to walk up here to come back down to the school. So, and again, highways are not concerned about the increased traffic movements. Also worth pointing out there is at the top here the formation of the potential for a footpath if the Town Council wanted to put one in, and Barracks are happy for that to provide a link through. That doesn't go beyond the site, because again, it's not required to mitigate the site. It's something that Barracks have offered should in future the Town Council wish to provide that connection.
Thank you. My understanding would be that obviously there's this extreme concern over Wash Pond Lane. If this application was approved, then there would be the ability at a date after that to change the traffic speed on Wash Pond Lane.
If I may, through you, Chairman, the concerns of local residents and the concerns of the Town Council regarding Wash Pond Lane need to be made to the Council as Highway Authority if there are concerns about the speeds along that road and the passage of people using the school from Ulwell, then that is appropriate to raise it with the council, but not on the back of this application. This application would not deliver those improvements.
Thank you, Ms. Carroll. Councillor Tribe, did you wish to come back or?
Within this application, Mr. Chairman, will put a lot of traffic on Wash Pond Lane. That's my point.
Thank you. Mr. Garrity.
Yeah, I think picking up Councillor Trite's point there, we do have a fallback position as far as the existing sites, the allocation and the permissions that already exist on the site. So the net difference between this and those previous approvals is not significant. There's no highway objection to this. And as Kim Carroll's pointed out, there would be a separate process if there was concern about speed limits, which we'd probably go through I'm presuming, the traffic regulation order procedures rather than through the planning application. But there are no inherent grounds on the back of this application to refuse it on those particular matters. Thank you.
Thank you. I can move on to Councillor Worth, the next speaker.
Thank you, Chairman. Yes, as we've been told, there is the principal development has been established and there is extent planning permission for this site. This proposal does give us an opportunity to look at some of the things a bit differently. And one of the concerns was the amount of dust created on that site. And as we've heard, that they won't do any cutting in that area, but that will still be dust created by vehicle movement around there, obviously in dry weather. So we could, I suppose, introduce conditions that the dust is mitigated by damping down. And also, could we not ask for a temporary dust barrier to be erected along that building line that is adjacent to the school? Yeah, I think that would be somewhere to help. And my other point is, looking at the layout on the screen at the moment, it shows a difference in road finish. Is that a difference in the fact that those bits of the road would not be adoptable if it's so designed in the future? Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor. Mr. Walters. Answer, please.
Thank you, Chair. We're just pulling up the construction management plan that has been put forward by the applicant, which is available on the website to view. And I'm going to try and briefly take you through what is covered off by this. Can you bear with me, because it's lengthy, so I'm going to try and summarise this. So particularly picking up on dust, I think it's worth going a bit further down.
Make it bigger.
Yeah. Dust suppression, mitigation and avoidance measures here. Particular care would be required to maintain dust emissions at practical minimum levels when working within the vicinity of residential properties and environmentally sensitive areas, and by that we mean the school, especially including the school and the preschool to the north. Best practice mitigation would be required during dry conditions. Dust reduction measures would include careful management of earth stockpiles, sheeting of vehicles transporting materials to and from the site, limiting the speed of general vehicles within the site to 20 miles an hour, surfacing of all roads as soon as possible in the programme, so you've got a hard surface instead of a dust track. The haul roads to be regularly cleansed, provision of wheel washing facilities at access points onto the local roads, so that not only prevents mud getting onto the highway, but it also reduces the dust as you're coming in. Visual monitoring will be carried out at sensitive locations on a daily basis. The potential for dust is highly weather dependent. If carried out in dry weather, increased water spraying would be required to ensure the surface material remains damp. In wet weather, greater attention will be paid to vehicle cleaning to ensure significant quantities of mud are not trafficked onto local roads, which once dry can become a significant source of dust. This is a 13-page document, so I won't go through the whole lot now, but there is a lot of detail here, and I think the point to make is that Environmental Health have looked at this very carefully, being very mindful of the legitimate concerns that are being raised by local residents and parents, to make sure that what is being done is as much as is practically reasonable to do during the construction process. hours of work will be limited as well. So I think the point to say is all of that has been considered in a great amount of detail, and the environmental health team are happy with that. In terms of moving to your second point about the road finishing, the highways team have made no comment about it not being adoptable. In fact, they've asked for a condition, an informative note reminding the applicant that should they wish to offer the roads up for adoption, they need to go through the formal process. It is down to the applicant whether they choose to provide the roads for adoption, but the highways team have raised no objection and raised no concerns about the ability of those roads to be adopted. And they obviously have access to proposed materials, the majority of which is tarmac, and then there's some block paving in the cul-de-sacs. Hopefully that answers that one for you.
Thanks, Rob. You satisfied that answer?
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. Yeah, I'm 99% satisfied with that answer. Obviously, the dust is going to be kept to a minimum, but I still feel that there is the opportunity to put up what I would say is a temporary dust shield between this development and the site of the school. I say it's a temporary thing during construction, so I'm just wondering if that is possible to be conditional on this. Otherwise, I'm happy with the answers from the officer. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Is that possible for a temporary condition?
Thank you, Chair. I think if members were minded to, then that's at least something I don't see that we could have a condition.
Yeah, I think we could certainly have a conversation around that. I mean, what I would suggest is perhaps we'd have a condition to say the details of such a screen to be submitted to us for agreement in advance of construction. So that's how we would want to do it, so that we could actually look at the details of such a screen. Because we've obviously got to be mindful of something that's feasible and practical on the site as well. And we need to engage in discussion with the applicant about how feasible that is. So I would propose that we would have a condition on the basis of getting further details to be agreed, and that I would sign it off. If you like, that could be in consultation with yourself as chair of the committee.
Thank you, Mr. Carradine. I think that will be with Councillor Clearance once she's back from the chair. And then my place.
Yeah, thank you. That's fine.
Okay, so my next speakers to ask questions are Councillor Took, and then Councillor Renton, and Councillor Took. Councillor Took.
Thank you, Chair. One very quick question. We covered off earlier that if this application didn't go forward, it was either refused or fell at some other hurdle. Fallback is that there is already an application that's got approval and reserved matters for, was it 52 houses? Of those 52, how many are affordable?
You're testing me now. I remember across both sites, across both sites you would have a total of 91 dwellings, 39 on the 7 and 52 on the northern. So this proposal actually reduces the number of units by 1. And the total is 30 across the 2. Now the split of that, I believe it was only 5 on the 7 site, and the reason for that is because the vacant building credit applies almost entirely to buildings on the 7 part of the site, and the only vacant building credit that comes into play for the northern part, so if I go back, this will help, is the lodge building. So there is some vacant building credit for this site, which means they have to provide 25 instead of the 26 that would be policy compliant. For this site, they'll only have to provide 5 because you've got that former school building. So the amount of affordable units across both schemes would be the same, and they're both policy compliant based on vacant building credit.
Thank you, Mr. Waters. So what's your question, Mr. Took?
Not actually sure. The northern part that's got planning permission will have 5 affordable units. No?
For you, if I may, 25 on the northern site because there's only 1 building currently there.
25 on the northern site, which has planning permission. If we add this other bit in, it rises to 30. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Cook. Councillor Brenton.
I'm sure I'll be with not asking questions now in debate.
I answered some questions at the moment. So I've got to further.
Okay, I'll leave it until.
Thank you. Councillor Cook. I'm sorry, Councillor Cook.
There's a question, Chairman. Thank you. Back on the construction management, I'm afraid. Through you to the officer. Where will the access be for the construction vehicles, please?
Waters.
Thank you, Chair. We're just pulling the plan back up. There, at present, there is a vehicular access, which is the former school access, which has been used. However, yeah, if Kim can share the screen for a second.
You see that?
Yeah. So the access point that will be used as part of the gender construction management would be the access that will be the permanent access, and part of the reason behind that is that that's got planning permission to be built as is. So instead of maintaining two accesses, they would use that top access, and as part of the construction management plan, that has to be hard surface as soon as possible, which they would have planning permission to do. So that can be happening immediately before the rest of the development begins.
Yeah.
Can I come back, Chairman, please? But that's probably what I thought you'd say. Is there a way we could condition that this to help to mitigate the construction of the upheaval and the dust and so on from heavy transport? Could we not have the access temporarily through where it's going to be? There's in future going to be no access, the lower road, as I would call it there, the southern road, for the purposes of the construction, to keep it as far away as possible, the movement of the vehicles from the school. Is that possible?
Waters.
Facing the development.
So as part of the planning history, the site compound has also been approved, the access coming in from that northern side. So I think it would be hard to insist on that at this point. I can't see a way that we could do that realistically.
Well, let's answer the question. It's not the answer I wanted to hear, actually, because I just think it would help alleviate some of the issues that we've heard with the other control measures that are in place, Chairman. I think if we can do this somehow, it would mitigate a little bit more the effects of the dust and the impact on the school and the preschool still. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Cook. I take your point. And perhaps there's a conversation that the officers could take up with the developers. Maybe it's a goodwill gesture to move forward at that, but they would remain in that room and have that discussion.
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. As was previously asked on the question about the temporary fencing for dust control, just to point out to members that we have to agree that in advance with the applicant, because that's under the requisition for, if it's a pre-commencement condition, we have to get the agreement, but we'll have that discussion. But as part of that discussion, we could raise the issue that was just mentioned as well, to see whether there is any scope for that. But that, again, we'd have to see if that was feasible. Okay, thank you.
Security. I've got no other members wishing to ask questions. Oh, Councillor Morgan.
Yeah, thank you. Sorry, it's not COVID. Yeah, I know it's nothing to do with the application per se, it hasn't been pointed out, but I am concerned about this Norfolk Road business. Basically, because there's a school that we both know less than a quarter of a mile from here, where we're still discussing speed limits going past it, and that is what, nearly 2 years down the line. So I'd like to think, if this application does get passed, then looking at that problem should be taken up with the highways almost as the building starts, so that we can start the process if necessary to look at that. I know it's out of this remit, but I think it is an important concern. I mean, Councillor Try knows the area, as we know the area that I've just mentioned, and you can see the problems that are going to arise, which are still not finally sorted out there. So that's my concern. I'm very pleased that we're going to have, I was going to suggest myself that we have this dust screen put up, because I've talked to Dorset Council for 40 odd years. I know exactly what it's like when you've got disruption to it. And I just hope that the monitoring is done carefully on that particular thing as well. Just my concern, absolutely.
Councillor Morgan, I don't think there was a question there, but we just read over what what's upon the lane. I think as the officers have said, that if the residents into the town council actually bring their concerns forward to Dorset Council, then those, if there are any concerns over the speed limit on that road, they can be addressed within the necessary committee. So members, I want to move to the debate before we go to the vote. Councillor Try.
Thank you very much, Chairman. The principle of the houses is clear and has been established. I think we all accept that. I know that there are many people who have doubts about this in the AONB, but nevertheless, the reality is that the former permissions have been given, and if we were to try and say no to it now, then we would certainly get thumped on appeal and the permissions reinstated. It's the argument, I believe, is a good bit deeper than that, and I would appeal to members of the committee to pay regard to what the ward councillors are saying, because I echo what Councillor Suttle said earlier, that this case, which is a very important one for Swanish, it's an extremely large one, it's a big one for Swanish. It is very important locally, and it really does merit a site visit and a full conducted tour by members of this committee, so that some of the complexities and the organisations involved can be fully described. It's so important for the future of Swanish, and it's the safety considerations more than anything else that are uppermost in the minds of not just Gary Suttle and myself, but the town council and the local residents. So I would like to move, if I may, that consideration of this application be deferred for the committee to undertake a site visit and a full conducted tour, and for arrangements for a footpath enabling safe access from Ulwell Road to the school to be concluded first. It is so important that we have the arrangements for that alternative to Wash Pond Lane agreed and in place before permission is given. I really think that's terribly important. So I would like to put forward that proposal, if I may. Thank you.
Just check with the officers that they're happy with that proposal. Security.
Well, I would just point out I'm not entirely sure what the purpose of a site visit would be on the basis of the issues that have been raised, because the footpath issue is not within the control of the site, or the application is not dependent on it for this, and we have to follow the tests. The conditions have to be placed on a development that meet the tests that are reasonable. So I'm not entirely sure why a site visit would actually assist with that. And I'm not sure we could do anything about it as far as the planning application is concerned, about ensuring that that was constructed prior to the development coming forward when we have no highway objection on those grounds.
For one thing, Chairman, the dangers would be self-evident to everybody.
And the impact on the school with the close proximity of the new build.
Through you, Chairman, I mean, that may be better arranged with the Highway Authority as a site meeting to look at the highway safety issues rather than for this council dealing with an application for 90 houses on a scheme that has already got the benefit of planning permission. It would not meet any of the tests for us to require provision of that footpath prior to this development coming in. And as officers, we would strongly advise against that as a way forward. Thank you.
Thank you. So I do have a proposal on the table for a deferment and a site visit. And I'd ask if there is a seconder for that. Councillor Brenton.
I will second Councillor Trine's request for a site visit. I agree that the footpath idea around Waterpond Lane is not part of this remit, but I do think 90 houses on this site with the sign over the road and being quite close. I mean, the permission is there, fair enough, but the layout doesn't have to be the layout we've got. And I think to look at things like the pond and the barrier treatment, I mean, the external barrier treatment in terms of green layout would be worth looking at, as well as the closeness to the preschool next door. So I think there's three things we could look at there that were inside the site.
Councillor Brenton.
If I,
Sorry, Mr. Cowell.
Thank you, Chairman. And if I may, in order to assist committee and to focus the committee's mind, I think it was Councillor Cook who earlier asked for a comparison between the layout of the previous scheme that can be implemented and the benefits and the measures that the applicant have put in place to try and address the relationship with the school. Members can go onto the site. I hear what you're saying about trying to get the scheme amended. The danger you have is if you, if members don't look critically at what is before you now and the improvements that have been put forward as part of this scheme, the applicants can implement that fallback position. And I just want you to remind you of that. The relationship with the school centres itself around the houses that you can see there. To the can you just show the changes in relation to the school are concentrated on a handful of houses. The remainder of the development doesn't have that same relationship with the school. We've negotiated some betterment for the school along that edge, and I'm just reminding members that those betterments are being delivered as part of this application, but the fallback situation still remains. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Cowell. Mr. Trice.
Chairman, the cooperation of the applicant in the arrangements for the footpath, which I've described, and which has preoccupied the local authority, the town council so much in the recent past, and local residents, that the arrangements for that footpath require the close cooperation of the applicant. I feel that cooperation would be more likely prior to the grant of permission. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Cook.
Thanks, Chairman. I'm risking making myself unpopular, but what does it matter, really? I don't agree with the idea of a site visit. I don't know what it could achieve. I think the safety issue is important, don't get me wrong, but it has to completely outside the remit of this committee. And, you know, it's something which can be looked at later on and probably will be. But, you know, we are where we are. We've got this in front of us. The second part, well, I would, no disrespect to my colleagues, a lot of them around and say they've been a bit longer than I have. But I would not envisage or delight with the idea of a group of councillors going there and helping to design a site. I fear, a camel is a horse designed by a committee, and wherever we get, if we went along with our own ideas about how that should be laid out. So I'm not quite sure whether a site visit would be valuable. I think it would probably bring more confusion into the mix longer term, and we could well end up with the 52 houses, which is much less satisfactory from the point of view of the school.
Thank you, Councillor. Sorry, Ms. Cowley, do you want to come back?
Just very briefly, I just wanted to remind members yet again that the purpose of us being here today is for you to consider the application that's before you. Thank you. And just to come back on what you've just said, to endorse what Councillor Cook has just said. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Cowley.
Sorry, Chair. I was literally about to just say that just to remind members as well of the National Planning Policy Framework in terms of presumption in favour of sustainable development, where applications should be approved without delay if they conform with the development plan. So deferrals and delaying of applications doesn't quite sit within that unless you've got very good reasons for doing so. So that would be my advice on that. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Garrett. Councillor Ward?
Yeah, I'd just like to confirm that I fully agree with Councillor Cook. We have here a proposal which we have with the extended planning permission already there. So we're not going to achieve any major changes to the layout of this development by going in and having a site visit. And I think the safety concern is a separate concern, not to be covered by this planning application. And I don't feel we would achieve anything by going on a site visit, because they could say, well, let's just go with 52 houses, we're going to build it as is, and that is not as, it doesn't give us the opportunity to put in a dust-proof fencing, etc., etc. So I think we'd be better going forward with this than having another stab at it at the site visit. I don't think it would be.
Thank you, Councillor. Members, I think we've given us a good airing. We've got a proposal currently on the table for a deferment of the site visit. I'm not going to accept the issue over the path because that is for another committee for another day. So I should go to the vote on this now, please. So all those in favour of the proposal that's on the table?
Site visit.
All those against?
Voting on the site visit.
Yes. Sorry, I thought I made that clear in the proposal for the site visit, deferment of the site visit. So it's two for, all those against? Five. Just confirm the case.
Yes. As Chairman, there's 2 for the site visit, but 5 against it.
Thank you, Mr. So moving back to the agenda, Councillor Worth.
Thank you, Chairman. I would like to propose that we approve this application with a condition on looking to the applicant providing this dust-proof fencing. There is a comprehensive management plan which I think looks to mitigate the amount of dust flying around, but I think just the addition of possibly dust-proof fencing along that boundary line with the school would help. So I'd like to have that as a condition, but I'm happy to propose approval of this.
Thank you, Councillor Worth. I'll go to the officers now. Can I have a seconder? Mr. Cook.
Well, I'm going to second it, but there's one query I've got. I support what the proposer said in terms of the dust mitigation, etc. But my concern is around this, that we've glossed over it a bit, this pond. It's to take rainfall away, isn't it? It's to collect rainwater, am I right? Yeah. So it'll be in quite often use in this country. Yes, it'll be quite big. What depth is this pond, please? The maximum depth? Waters?
Thank you, Chair. So the depth of the pond is 2 metres. The maximum that it would be full to in a peak rainfall event would be 1.3 metres.
4'6" in old money then, as we say. Okay. Right. And now it's an area, it's a public area in the sense that it's usable by the residents and another. Yes, it's like a mini sang. Correct me if I'm wrong. And there's this pond for 8 months of the year, let's say, in there at varying degrees of depth. What's the sort of fencing or protection that it's got, please?
Yeah. So the advice that I received from the drainage engineer is where you have a gradient of 1 in 3 or less, you don't necessarily have to provide that. If it is a concern for members, then it is an additional condition that could be added to provide fencing. You wouldn't determine people to get over, but I think if there are concerns for younger children, then some suitable, reasonably low fence it is a condition that could be added if required.
Yes, Chairman, accepted. You don't have to do it, but I think it would be the right thing to do with access available as and when it's dry, whether that be gated or whatever. I think that's appropriate. I think it's our job to ensure that we talked about safety on the road, which we can't deal with in this committee, but safety within the site we can deal with, and I think we should do. So if we could have that added to a condition, together with what the condition that we've got for the dust mitigation, I'm very happy to second.
We'll come back to this in a minute. If I go to Councillor Worth first, you have to accept that?
Yeah, I'm perfectly happy with that as an added condition. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Carroll, if you want to come back.
Yeah. Members, while you were discussing, I quickly drafted a condition wording. I mean, it might be tweaked, but just to give you some sort of indication of what we might be able to achieve. I've got details of a dust screen or similar along the site boundary with St Mary's School and Preschool site to the north. Should be submitted to and agreed in writing prior to the implementation of this consent. The temporary screen should be retained for the duration of the development, and the reason for that is in the interest of amenity. And with regard to the fencing to the drainage area, then that could either be incorporated in the landscaping condition that you've currently got, you know what number that is, sorry. Or we can do a separate condition which is similarly worded to the one I've just read out. The details of fencing to the drainage area shall be submitted to and approved prior to the that area coming into use. Okay, thank you.
Yeah, I'm happy with that. It's a separate condition because it clarifies it, brings it to the fore.
Okay. And that area would be gated as well to allow use for it in dry areas. And Mr. Waters, I believe you want to come back.
Yeah, we're not sure as officers how easy it would be to manage that and to enforce that. So the recommendation probably would be that it would be better to be fenced off so that we have that level of safety, because I think, you know, what triggers do you put in place to say it can be open? Who's going to make sure that happens and what have you? So your officer's recommendation, if you're minded to go with a condition like that, is probably it's better to have a permanent fence to ensure safety as opposed to one that if someone forgets to shut the gate, then we could end up with a situation.
Mr. Garrity, I believe you want to come back.
Just to clarify as well on the dust-proof fencing, that we just need to be clear as well about the duration that will, so that condition would just have to pick up that would be during construction. That's fine. Yeah, it just wasn't. I might have misheard that. Sorry.
I said retain for the duration of the development.
Okay, thank you. The officers finished with any further comment? Yep. Okay, so I've got a proposal on the table and a seconder to grant as laid out in the. Yes, Luke.
Thank you, Chairman. I'm sort of looking at these two proposals effectively and trying to see which one is the best, the better. So we're looking at the one that's currently got permission, which is for the smaller amount, doesn't include the southern part, and I assume doesn't include the attenuation pond. So there'll be no attenuation pond for that development if that was the one that went ahead. I'm trying to work out which of the two is the better all round. And with the larger one for the 90 houses, we get the attenuation pond and we get some more affordable housing. And it seems to fit better as a unit. So I'm coming down in favour of this scheme. I think the dust prevention is an excellent idea. But I think I just want to make the point that if it was one or the other, and it seems to me that that's the case, then this is probably better than the other. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. So the other, of course, already has planning permission. Okay, members, so I've got a proposal on the table, and a second to go with the recommendations that's laid out within the report. And also I have two conditions, one surrounding the temporary dust screen and the other for the fencing of the attenuation pond and hopefully gates as well, so it can be used in short periods. And the recommendations as laid out in the report was A, to grant subject to conditions, section 16.0 and 17.0, and the completion of a statutory planning application to secure affordable housing and saying management. And so members, I'm going to go to the vote. So all those in favour? Five. All those against? I should have read that as well, sorry. And the recommendations you'll see within your committee report that is pleased to refuse permission to require legal agreements to secure affordable housing and saying management is not completed by 6th of October 2022 or such extended time as agreed by the head of planning. So members are still five. So all those against? Any abstentions? Thank you, members.
Chairman, for the purposes of the webcasting, there were 5 votes for the application, none against, and 2 abstentions.
Thank you, Mr. Weber.
It's James.
That Washbrook Lane.
What?
It's
It's fine.
That's all right.
No, it's fine. We were ready for that condition.
James bringing in Bournemouth Council.
Thank you.
And that's all right.
Thank you for coming.
I'm sure it's where he thinks they should go.
Yeah. Members, while we're clearing the room, we'll take a 5-minute comfort break during the meeting. Thank you.
Thank you.
Oh, thank you, Peter. Yes, you promised to overtime.
David.
All of the left. All of the left.
Oh, no.
Just it's because I had another meeting.
Absolutely. I'll let you just come in.
Okay,
First one.
you're right.
And
Yeah,
you
sorry.
just
Yeah, I did very good. Sounded interesting.
this one we want.
Yeah, fine.
With this one, don't forget to only
It's going to fly.
Probably want to fix that Swanson. So they get this one.
Eastern Planning Area Committee meeting after a short recess. Going to move on now to, I should mention that Councillor Trite has had the meeting of officers to record that as he's got another engagement. Thank you. And we'll move to our second plan application on the agenda at 3/19/2378/UL. Change of use and conversion of 4 existing agricultural buildings to form 9 dwelling houses, alterations to other outbuildings and associated landscaping and demolition of redundant buildings as amended by plans recommended 17th to 7/20, to revise window sizes and positions on Unit D, show provisions for refuse collection and add parking space and plans recommended 4th of the 1st 22, to propose access via the existing road to the south only and not to the west via the existing agricultural traffic range farm, Colville, Wimborne, Dorset, BH21 for HX. Okay. If I could hand over to a case officer, Mr. James Brightman.
Good afternoon, councillors. I'm James Brightman, the case officer for this application. The chairman has explained the description of the proposal, and you can see it up there in front of you. The application comes to committee at the request of the nominated officer, given the concerns of the parish council, planning policy officer, and ward members' request for a committee decision. It is to be noted that the current application proposes access from the south only, not from the west as originally proposed. Just one update for your members. Officers are suggesting these 2 informative notes should it be decided to grant planning permission. The first, I'll read them out. For the avoidance of doubt, the applicant is advised that the existing access track to the west of the application site, which runs between the west boundary of the application site and the range, does not form part of this application, and use of that access track for use by residential traffic has not been established. Secondly, it has been brought to the council's attention that the southern access road is restricted by covenant to use by agricultural vehicles only. Whilst this is not a material planning matter, the applicant is advised that it may be necessary to obtain the covenant holder's agreement to use this route for traffic associated with the development. So they're informative notes only, not conditions. The application site is located in the Greenbelt and in a rural location, some 2.7 kilometres from the centre of Wimborne. The red dot indicates the rough position of the site here. Here's the more detailed location. It is about 500 metres from the nearest part of the village envelope of Furze Hill to the south. The site has a number of agricultural buildings on it, which are now redundant for agricultural purposes, and which eight to be removed. There are some dwellings to the south. Vehicular access to the site is from the south and west, although both these routes are currently restricted to use by agricultural vehicles only. You can see there's the western access agricultural vehicles use only, and this is the southern one, also used by the cluster of dwellings. There are 4 buildings to be converted into dwellings, which would form units A to D on this aerial photograph. These are all to be converted with the exception of building D, which is to be extended on its eastern side. Here are photos to explain the context of the site. This photo is taken from Grange, the lane outside the site, looking up the existing access that serves the cluster of dwellings and also the farm. We're now on the site and we can see view of the existing building A, 2 views. It's an open fronted barn, which has a corrugated roof, and you can see that the legs or the stanchions have been repaired here with new metal inserts which have been concreted into the ground. Here is our big buildings B and C, corrugated metal clad buildings. Another one, unit C, is open fronted too, utilitarian design. Again, unit B, another open fronted barn. Moving further to the south on the site, unit E and unit D, which are the existing units. Unit E is to be converted to dwelling D, and unit D here is to be removed. And the buildings shown as Unit E there, which will be proposed dwelling D, will be extended on this side. Another view of those two units. Moving on to the proposed site plan. Unit A, the open fronted building, is to be converted, this location here, to provide 3 times 2 bedroom dwellings on a single floor. We'd have a rear courtyard garden with parking outside the front and parking spaces in the southern part of the building in this carport area here, but within the existing structure. Unit B is partly open fronted and is to provide a 2-storey 4-bedroom dwelling on 2 floors. We'd have a rear garden with parking at the side. Unit C would form 2 4-bedroom dwellings on 2 floors, rear gardens and parking at the front, opposite and the side. And proposed Unit D convert existing Unit E, and it will be extended on its eastern side, and that will provide 4 bedrooms on 2 floors, bedrooms each. Would have a rear garden and parking at the sides. New tree planting is shown indicatively on the north of the site and part of the east here. There's some new trees indicatively shown within the site. These are the existing elevations. So we have Unit A here, very long open fronted barn. And the proposal is to convert it into those dwellings. And this has got clay tile, roof tiles and timber cladding for the walls. This is the larger Unit B as existing. This shows what would be done with timber cladding and a metal roof. Unit C, another open fronted building, and a proposal with steel roof, metal roof and timber cladding. And timber cladding here. And finally, units D and E, building E, are the one to be converted. This is what is intended. Again, metal roof and timber cladding. The other elevations there. The key issues to discuss are the principle of development, the impact on the greenbelt, the impact on the landscape and the character and appearance of the area, impact on amenities of the occupants of adjacent properties and those of future occupants of proposed dwellings, impact on road safety and impact on biodiversity. Firstly, we discuss the principle of development. The site is outside the settlements in the core strategy, so policy KS2, which directs new development to existing settlements, is engaged. Proposal is not in an isolated position, given the adjacent dwellings to the south, and would not create additional built form or sprawl in the countryside, given its reusing existing buildings, and would reduce the building volume with the removal of the 8 buildings proposed. No clear harm would arise in respect to the policy KS2. The site 500 metres to the south of Birmingham is identified as a village in policy KS2. The council has a 5.2-year housing supply, so policy KS2 is not out of date in that respect. Proposal would enhance its immediate setting, given the acceptable appearance of the conversion works, removal of buildings, reduction in hard circle, and the new planting. Proposal is considered to accord with National Planning Policy Framework paragraph 150D, in that it would reuse buildings of permanent and substantial construction and preserve openness, not conflict with greenbelt purposes. As there are no policies in the core strategy that consider the conversion of buildings to dwellings, an assessment is required of whether the impact on the greenbelt provides a clear reason to resist the proposal, along with an assessment of whether any adverse impacts on the proposal would significantly and demonstrably outweigh the benefits. The proposal is considered acceptable in principle for these reasons. Moving on to impact on the greenbelt, the proposal accords with core strategy policy KS3 in the development plan. But as there are no specific policies in this plan that address conversion of buildings in the Greenbelt to dwellings, the policies set out in section 13 of the National Planning Policy Framework concerning Greenbelt are applicable. The buildings to be converted are considered to be of permanent and substantial construction, and this assessment followed a site visit and in light of the submitted structural surveys. As reuse of buildings is proposed, paragraph 150D of the NPPF is relevant, and this is considered to be accorded with, as it would reuse buildings of permanent and substantial construction and preserve Greenbelt openness by not adding to the built form. The proposal would not encroach into the countryside, not conflict with the other Greenbelt purposes. These are checking unrestricted sprawl of large built-up areas, preventing neighbouring towns merging, preserving setting of historic towns, and assisting in urban regeneration by encouraging recycling of derelict and other urban land. The extension to existing Unit E to form Unit D would not result in a disproportionate addition to that building, given its modest dimensions, and it's considered to be appropriate development in the Greenbelt. The proposal would bring parked vehicles and domestic paraphernalia within the curtilages of the dwellings, and this would result in some loss of openness. However, the buildings and curtilages would not encroach into the countryside, and the extent of buildings would be pulled away from the edge of the site in the north and east areas. And this plan shows the buildings to be removed, outlined in with the blue, dark blue line, the 8 buildings here. And this would improve the Greenbelt openness, and therefore the application is appropriate development under paragraph 150D. It is interesting to note that the site has 2 prior approval permissions for the use of units B and C, which are the 2 in the north of the site here. That's 2 dwellings, and those represent a legitimate fallback position where there's no requirement to remove any more buildings or landscape the site. And the proposed scheme is to remove buildings which will increase openness and weighs in its favour. The landscaping character and appearance impact. The site isn't part of any protected landscape, and it is considered the proposal would enhance the site by removing the utilitarian buildings and reducing the area of hard standing and improving the appearance of the 4 buildings to be retained, and also to introduce the new planting, which would enhance the landscape. Impact on the amenity of adjacent occupants and people who would live in the new dwellings. There are a handful of dwellings to the south of the site, as can be seen here with the blue address labels. The nearest of these is a property called Petersham, you can just make out there. The separation distance between the proposed dwellings and this property is sufficient to prevent any harm to the amenity of occupants of Petersham and those properties further to the south in terms of any overlooking, any loss of light or dominance from the buildings. The buildings aren't to be increased in size apart from building D, so no dominance would arise. And the way the new windows are positioned are such that there's no direct overlooking of those adjoining properties. There would be some impact from vehicle movements when you have extra housing and vehicle movement, traffic associated with housing coming up this existing access, but the site used to be a farmyard anyway, so we have to factor in the fact they're going to lose agricultural vehicles coming up this access. But even still, the actual traffic movement disruption from a relatively small number, 9 dwellings, is not significant to just cause a harmful impact on the amenity of the properties in this location. There would be some impact from electric light spill from the inside of the dwellings, but this would not be significant. In terms of any external lighting, there's a condition suggested to require details of any such lighting to be agreed by the council before it is installed. Impact on the road safety and the parking provision in the area. The proposal is to be served by the existing access road to the south. Just move up to the south here, that joins Grange and serves dwellings to the south. This currently permits agricultural vehicles to use the site. Although the applicant originally intended for the western access track to be used by the development, which is the access up here, this is now no longer proposed, and it is only to be determined on the basis of the southern access. Proposed site plan shows gates across the western access. It's hard to see from this plan, admittedly, but there is a gate there with a fence and here to stop residential traffic using these accesses. And this has a post and rail fence to prevent use of the access and to restrict its use by agricultural vehicles only. There's also a gate across the track in the north, joins land and agricultural use to the north. Is still in operation today. Council's highways officer considered the southern access is acceptable, and the vehicle movement generated by the 9 proposed dwellings would not impact on road safety. To ensure no use of the western access, as this is unsuitable for residential traffic, conditions set are suggested to require no use of this. In terms of parking and turning on the site, the proposed parking accords with the council's residential parking guidance, and the level of provision is acceptable, and core strategy for the KS 11 and 12 are complied with. Moving on to biodiversity impact. There have been comments received in response to the application in terms of concerns over the impact on protected species on the site. The submitted ecology report identified no habitat for protected species on the site and sets out biodiversity enhancements in a biodiversity plan that's been approved by the council's natural environment team. Such enhancements include bat boxes, swallow cups, hedgehog friendly fencing, native hedging and wildflower pot planting. And this accords with the Dorset Biodiversity Protocol and Core Strategy Policy ME1. The council's environmental health officer has advised that the site may pose a risk of contamination given its historic use, and to ensure this is minimised, a pre-commencement condition is suggested requiring contaminated land investigation, and that is under condition 8. Refuse and recycling collection. Although the plans show refuse collection from the application site, and we'll just move back to the plan, the applicant was proposing a bin store here, and they had put a turning movement for a refuse collection vehicle on the site. However, having talked to our Dorset Waste team, the existing residents have their waste collected from Grange on the curbside here. And the waste manager is happy that collection is from this place as for the proposal, and that would meet our waste regulations. This is to show members the access to the site and also the area where the bins are currently put out for collection. The other issues, I mentioned earlier about the site not being well served by public transport and being outside the settlements identified in KS2. It is going to be occupied by people with cars, undoubtedly. But however, given the limitations of development in rural areas recognised in the National Planning Policy Framework under paragraph 79, and given the site is relatively close to the village of Firs Hill and the town of Wimborne, which would potentially support the public house and shop in Firs Hill, and also Wimborne, the vehicle journeys to services and facilities would be minimised. Surface water drainage. There is a small area of high risk of surface water flooding. I'll just show you the plan. This is Petersham here. This was mentioned in some of the objections, so just covering it. There's a high risk of surface water flooding in the area of Petersham here, roughly this area, and woodcuts. And to ensure this is no exacerbation of this issue, conditions 3 and 4 are suggested to require details of the surface water management and maintenance schemes for the development to be submitted and approved by the council. also mentioned the fallback position earlier, just to bear that in mind, that the B and C, just two dwellings, admittedly, out of the 9, have a fallback position of this prior approval consent. Conclude, core strategy policy KS2 is an up-to-date policy, as the council can show a 5-year housing supply respect of National Planning Policy Framework paragraph 11, which is the presumption of in favour of sustainable development. And the conflict with KS2, given the fact it's outside the settlements, is outweighed by the benefits of reusing existing buildings and the visual enhancements of the buildings and their settings that would result. The development is considered appropriate development in the Greenbelt and would result in an improvement in openness of the Greenbelt from the removal of existing buildings, and there would be no conflict with the purposes of the Greenbelt. There is no development plan policy to address the reuse of rural buildings for dwellings, and this triggers Policy 11, paragraph D of the National Planning Policy Framework, Sustainable Development Policy. However, the Greenbelt policy in the NPPF does not provide a clear reason to refuse the proposal, and the adverse impact of the proposal in respect of the reliance of future occupants on the dwellings on private vehicles to access services and facilities does not significantly and demonstrably outweigh the scheme's benefits, which are its contribution to housing supply, enhancement of visual amenity, and biodiversity enhancement. And on this basis, the proposal is considered to be sustainable development in terms of that NPPF paragraph 11. For the reasons set out, the application is recommended for approval, Mr. Chairman, and I'll leave this aid memoir up for members. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Brightman, for your report. Thank you. Mr. Norfolk, do we have any speakers on this application?
Chairman, as of 8:30 on Monday morning, there were no formal requests to address the committee on this particular application. However, overnight, I've received an email from Robert Ellis on behalf of the Gaunts estate, who, to his mind, was expecting to speak today. He can't now attend, but Mr. Ross is here, I understand, to speak on his behalf. But I can only say that the correspondence with Mr. Ellis this morning was the first I'd heard about them wishing to speak. And I've checked my emails.
So we're outside of the protocols that we would normally adopt. So the I will not allow them to speak. Thank you. Thank you. In which case, members, I will move to the members' questions to the officer for any points of clarification. Councillor Coates.
Thank you, Chairman. Thanks, James, for your presentation on the oversight. You understand it. Perhaps it's otherwise a little bit difficult configuration, isn't it? But
yes.
Who owns the covenant, please, on the Southern Access Road?
It's my understanding that Dr. and Mrs. Craig Marle own that from the information provided to me. But it's not really a planning consideration, Councillor, but from the correspondence, Dr. and Mrs. Craig Marle own the covenant, to my understanding. But it isn't a material consideration for the planning merits.
I understand that. I've not got a further question, but I think I would like to talk more about this as we go forward in the debate, Chairman, if that's possible. I think at this stage, that's the only question I've got for clarity. Okay.
Yeah, thank you. Good. Councillor Took.
Thank you, Chair. Question, if I may. How far away is this site from protected heathland at Holt Heath? It looks to me like it's only 2 or 3 kilometres.
It's over the 400 metres for the consultation.
So it's
between 400 metres and 5 Ks. So for the purposes of mitigation, our sill regime would collect mitigation.
So it's just relying on silt regime
Yes,
rather than SANG or.
that's correct. It's only 9 dwellings.
Right, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Cook. The next speaker is Councillor Worth.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just a question, what is the distance from these dwellings to the main road where the bin collection point is going to be? Just as a matter of interest.
I'm measuring it, Councillor. I don't know exactly. We shall see. We can do that for you.
Wait, that plan doesn't take you down, does it? Where's the location plan?
Oh.
Location plan.
Trying to find we've got the technology to do this online.
At the start, it shows it pretty well, didn't you?
I used to teach out there.
We're estimating around 60 metres if we're looking at the width of the carriageway. It's a complete estimate, I'm afraid.
Maybe a bit more. Oh, there's a scale on this, sorry. Can you see there?
In the old days, we'd have had a proper big size plan with a scale rule.
Yeah.
If I can share my screen with you, Chairman, then it will give you a gauge. If I just share the location plan. Can you find my Chairman? Members, I'm just sharing my screen at the moment. Can you see the scale at the bottom here? That shows a 50-metre distance, and there it is. So that's 100 metres potentially. 50, taking that scale at the bottom. Can you just see that at the bottom of the screen? Hopefully that answers your question.
Perhaps 125. I've just done a quick scale with a paper off my plan.
Yeah.
So in excess of 100, I would say.
Councillor Worth.
Thank you.
Yeah, if we could just come back on that. That's not an unacceptable distance for somebody that is fit, healthy and able-bodied, but I would think if somebody is not, that fit, it's quite a long way to expect a resident to drag the bin down a lane, especially during winter hours where there's limited daylight, etc., etc. So maybe not the best thing in the world.
Good. Thank you, Councillor Worth.
Through you, Chair.
Mr. Brighton, I understand that the site does actually conform to policy if needed.
It does. I mean, the alternative would be that the council collected waste from the site itself, which would require a 26-ton refuse collection vehicle to go up that access, past those houses into the site, and they'd have to make up the surfacing accordingly to take the 26-ton vehicle. But having spoken to the waste manager yesterday, they do collect from, they don't go up that in a 26-ton vehicle, which is the one they use for that area. There was some discussion about whether the smaller vehicles could be used, but it is being confirmed that 26-tonner is used. So I don't think it'd be practical necessarily to actually get the vehicle up there, but I see your point in terms of dragging bins.
That's for you, Councillor Worth.
Yeah.
Thank you. Could I just ask, Mr. Brightman, do we have a record of any littering within that area with the bins already put out? Being in a rural area, not contained actually on the site?
No.
Nothing to my knowledge, Councillor.
Thank you. Do we have any more members who wish to ask questions? In which case, Councillor Brenton.
Sorry, Chair, but it's a sort of traditional question from me. Has there been any, I see on the list of things you're considering, was there any consideration of the carbon footprint of the new buildings?
Right now.
I'm afraid, Councillor, we don't have a policy in our local plan that addresses these sort of sites. Because we're on the Christchurch and East Dorset core strategy. The bigger sites have a bit of a trigger to only ask for. It's desirable to have this technology, but we haven't got a policy to insist on it, especially for the small sites. But I expect they will be built to high insulation standards, which is the key thing about reducing the carbon footprint. But that's all I can say, really.
Can I come back with the, I assume this is not on the gas main? Or this will be filled fired heating or something like that?
I wouldn't have thought it was on the main grid, no.
There's no main sewer, unlike the gas main.
Okay, we've got nobody else wishing to ask questions. I'll move into the debate part of it. Councillor Cook.
Want me to go first?
It's a privilege of being Vice Chairman, Councillor Cook, as you will know.
Okay, I'm a ward member, I know. Can I have a go at the end as well, please?
Certainly.
Well, thank you, Chairman, anyway. Yeah, as ward member, you think I probably have got a lot to say about this one, and you'll be sad to hear that I have. It's a bit like a colander, this one. It's full of holes, I think, and accepted the principle of development. But coming from, well, I've got 7 parishes in my ward, which is quite a big rural ward, most of it, a lot of it edging onto the town of Wimborne and the urban area of Coal Hill as well. Holt figured up recently in a top 10 nationally of the most desirable places to live in the UK, and such is it that over the last few years particularly, Holt has seen an extraordinary number of these applications for farming conversions, as they know. If we were to take an application, if it could ever happen, under constraints it probably wouldn't, but if we could take an application for 50 properties en bloc in Holt, I think it's safe to say it would get thrown out for all sorts of reasons. But if you look over the last 2 to 3 years, what we've had and the applications coming through, we've probably had at least that number being built as either individuals or 2s or 3s, or in this case, 9. So it's a little bit of development by stealth. I don't know if that's the right description. And I'm not opposed to development, full stop. But there was a thing about sustainability. Yes, it's close to Purshill Village, but Purshill hasn't got a lot. Really forgive me, Purshill, but it hasn't got a lot. It's got a lovely little village shop and post office, which still does quite well despite the closure of Purshill, I believe. It's also got a pub, the Stocks, which I can recommend very highly. It's extremely good, a selection of ales and a fairly good menu.
We go there next time.
And that's all within short walking distance of this site, with or without your wheelie bin. However, sustainability means that everybody that lives there has got to use some sort of motorised transport to get to main areas of shopping, whether it be Wimborne, whether it be Ferndale or wherever. So we're adding to the footprint in that sense, and I'm not an environmentalist, but I'm just trying to think sensibly about this. We're looking to reduce car usage generally. There's no public transport in the area. It's said that, okay, the development replaces redundant buildings, and it's good that they could go in. This is not a remote location, they say. I would dispute that, it is a bit, because they're replacing redundant farm buildings. But farm buildings are what you expect to see, Chairman, in a rural setting, in a fairly remote location. You don't necessarily expect to see properties, apart from the odd isolated one. So there are some worries about that, okay. But you know, been given reasons why you can't really refuse those not material reasons, I don't think. But the bigger issue here, and I'm suffering from this on another site in Holt, is this access road. My question about the covenant is because covenant owners very often can be difficult. This at the present allows just for agricultural vehicles. The idea is that we'll hopefully get the covenant lifted to allow domestic vehicles. Now, I'm assuming there's some sort of lifting already in place because there's other properties leading up to it. So presumably they have access. So this right of access can present a problem. I know I'm first to say we have to look at the application as it is here, but we also have to think ahead about possible issues. We have another issue in the parish where we have almost exactly this problem, where there's a great dispute between residents over a right of access to a development on what was a farm. And this has not been clarified 2.5 years down the line, and there's all sorts of legal issues arising because of this. And we've had residents trying to block access on this road that supposedly has got right of way. So I think we need to establish quite clearly that this southern access is going to be used as a right of way to access 9 properties, which will need regular access for their own vehicles and white van man, etc., etc. So that's point 1. Point 2, back on the refuse, that Councillor Worth said, yeah, I don't think it's reasonable to expect people from 9 properties to bring 9 bins plus the waste bin, food waste. So that's 18 bins down 100 metres for collection and litter the roadside there. It's going to have to be negotiated for private refuse collection, I suspect. I don't think we can do it. Assisted collection would be an issue. People that can't wheel their bins, that's already been mentioned. And I know we offer assisted collections. So there is an issue there. The western access, except the fact it's gated. You said, I think, James, Chairman, through you did say it's gated, I think at the western end there. That's correct. But will there be some sort of clarity at the southern end to say there's no access to the site? Will that be fairly rigidly controlled? Because we don't want vehicles going up that western track, albeit it's not evidently as in good order as the southern track. It's a much more rough agricultural track. But it needs to be clear that there is no access at the point of connection with the Grange itself. But those are the worries I have about this. I accept the fact that it's very difficult to refuse this application. But I do worry about the creeping development that we're seeing, particularly in this rural parish, and that does concern me, particularly from the sustainability aspect. So on that note, Chairman, thank you.
Any others? Thank you. Do we have any speakers? Mr. Took.
Thank you, Chair. I asked a question earlier about mitigation in terms of heathland. Part of the explanation was we were going to rely on CIL, so payments as mitigation, because there were only 9 dwellings. From what Councillor Cook's just said, in the area, there are, I believe, substantially more than 9 dwellings that have got planning permission. And my understanding was that within an area, you can accumulate, or you should accumulate, a site. So you have a site of 9 houses here and 10 houses there and 3 houses together, and you start to get way beyond the limits for creation of a SANG or additional mitigation other than CIL. Is that the case here or not?
Through you, Chairman. It's correct that cumulatively there may well be more than the required level of dwellings for a SANG in an area, but that doesn't trigger the policy in terms of needing a SANG that the Dorset Heathlands planning framework sets out as to one particular development. I do appreciate your point, but we can't request or require something like this on a sort of one development here, one development there.
We should come back, Mr. Took.
Only from my experience in my own village of Alderholt, which is not too far away from here. We're right on the edge of Cranwell Chase, well, Cranwell Heath. And we have a number of houses, and planning have told us that we need those houses need to have SANG before they can be built out. And that's down to an accumulated number of planning permissions that have been clear. So I'm not sure I understand this fully.
Very good skills for that. I need somebody to move suspension of standard orders to continue past the 3-hour mark.
So moved, Chairman.
Thank you. Have a seconder, please. Thank you. All in favour? Thank you, members.
Old Road is a specific case in point.
We always are.
Yes. Natural England's view on Old Road is that the in combination effects in Old Road, because of the distance of the available alternative natural green space. There are some in Burwood, there are some elsewhere, and some in Wimborne, etc. Because of the distance that people in Old Road should have to travel. But they've looked at some of the sites specifically in combination, and that's why we call them HIP projects. They've had to deliver their own project to mitigate the impacts of particular schemes in Alderholt. Elsewhere, we're relying on the Heathlands SPD that's in place, and Natural England are looking at the cumulative impacts of development across the district as a whole. And in this instance, those triggers haven't been hit in Holt. So whilst there is the conversion of individual buildings that are taking place, and that's what the government is promoting. You know, if you've got a barn, you can convert it to a dwelling without needing plan permission sometimes. But those triggers in Holt haven't been hit, the thresholds haven't been met to warrant specific mitigation. So within Holt, the current situation is that we are relying on collecting the mitigation through SIL. It's not that it's not being delivered, but it's being delivered through SIL for individual developments such as this. Thank you.
Did you wish to come back, Councillor Took?
Just to say thank you for the explanation. Quite clear. Thank you, Ken.
Well, Councillor Worth to speak next.
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. Coming back onto this covenant, could we not make it conditional that no development takes place until we've been assured that that covenant has been removed? Because otherwise, if we allow the development without the covenant being removed, we're opening up a can of worms, which I think Councillor Cook has alluded to that's happened in other areas. So I'm just wondering if that would be possible.
Thank you for your question, Councillor Worth. I'll go to our solicitor, Mr. Craven.
Thank you, Chairman. So my understanding is the access route already has an accepted planning use for residential purposes, as Councillor Cook alluded, because of the residential properties that are there. The issues over private property rights and whether there is a right of access or not, and that's a private matter between the owners, and it's not something for the planning system to be involved with, and so therefore a condition along those lines would be unreasonable. They're legally unreasonable. Thank you, Jim.
Thank you, Mr. Craven. You satisfied with the answer, Councillor Worth? Thank you. Our next speaker is Councillor Cook.
Well, thank you, Chair. You did look at me and I sort of deferred that, I might like to say something, but I don't want to labour this one, but I mean, I understand exactly where we are. Been around in planning long enough to understand the issues, that why we can't do this in this case. But it is a shame because there is likely to be some issues going forward on this access. The point about the cumulative effect of the properties. Yeah, and we don't get any. I think the last time we had some affordable properties in Holt were built about 15, 16 years ago. There were 7 of them. And we were really delighted when we got those because it's something almost unheard of. And we can't get any of that in Holt with all these individual, either additional houses being put on where barns were, or people putting large extensions or building properties within their grounds of their house. You know, had an awful lot of this. And none of it can be classed as affordable, which is a shame. And I can understand people wanted to do this because they've got land and they don't want to move, but they want to make something out of the land. I understand the reasons why we can't refuse it, but I'm coming towards not really feeling happy and being able to support this actually. Oh, you know, and it's against my planning head in a way, but you understand where I'm coming from.
I do, Councillor Cook, thank you. But no other members wishing to speak, so I'm looking for a proposal from someone. Councillor Worth.
Thank you, Chairman. Despite some reservations about the suitability of this site, there are no real planning reasons why we couldn't reduce this site. So therefore, under those circumstances, I propose that we approve this site on the lines of the officer's recommendations. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Worth. Do you have a seconder?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yes, I second it. I appreciate the comments that have been made. But I think, as the solicitor says, we can grant permission, and then the actual access is then obviously going to be between the developer and whoever owns the government on the road. So I think in view of that, then I second the proposal.
You, Councillor Morgan. Before I move to the vote, could I just have a confirmation from the officers surrounding the western access onto the site and the condition, the potential condition that can come with that? I want to note that you did.
Certainly, Councillor. There is condition 7 on the agenda on page 80. I'll read it out. It says, vehicular access to the development hereby approved shall only be from the south, using the existing road that also provides access to the adjacent residential properties to the south, as shown on approved drawing reference. The western access shall be modified to prevent vehicular access and signage erected at the junction of the western access with Grange in accordance with the scheme first agreed by the local planning authority prior to the first occupation of any of the approved dwellings, unless express plan permission to use the western access is first obtained. So that incorporates the signage and prevention of that physical prevention of the access being used. And sorry, the two informative notes were about the covenant to bring any future buyer of the site's attention to the fact there's an issue with the covenant.
Thank you, Mr. President. Okay, members, so we have a proposal and a second on the table to go with the officer recommendation as laid out in the report. So can I ask all those in favour? All those against? And there's no abstention. So, Mr. Alder, could I just get you to confirm the vote, please?
That's 4 in support, 2 against, no abstentions.
Thank you, members, and thank you for the report. There'll be a brief break while we change over for the third and final application, members.
The end of it.
Sorry. Well, you were cool.
It's C. C.
Oh, thank you.
Well.
Those are yours on the floor?
Yes, they are.
That's right. Can you reach? I have my charger back. Will you return that to that lady?
Yes, I will.
Thank you, in case I forget at the end.
Do you want me to stay around?
Hmm?
Do you want me to? Yeah, you see. More support?
It might be nice, yeah. You can work it over there.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you, members. We'll move to our last application, planning application today, which is 3/21/1277/FUL. Change of use and conversion of existing redundant agricultural building to 2 4-bedroom dwellings at Bedborough Farm, Hutton's Drive, Shelville, Wimborne, BF21 7BQ. And the case officer to report on this is Miss Lucy Page.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Chair. Yes, as the Chair has set out, the application is at Bedborough Farm, Hutton's Drive, Coal Hill. The application report starts on page 87 of your agenda. The application has been referred to committee by the nominated officer, having gone through the council scheme of delegation following objection from Ferndown Town Council. Bedborough Farm lies to the north of the A31 and is located 4 miles from Wimborne to the southwest and 3 miles from Ferndown to the southeast. The site is located in the southeast Dorset Greenbelt, and there is quite a lot of planning history to the site, and a planning inspector, considering a previous application, judged that the scheme, whilst unacceptable for other reasons, would not result in the creation of isolated homes in the countryside. This slide shows the grey shaded buildings that have previously been converted to residential units and the relationship of the barn within the farmyard setting. The barn to which the application relates is annotated by the arrow on the right-hand side of the plan. Yes, sorry, moving on. This plan shows the relationship with how other agricultural buildings have been previously converted to residential. There are a total of 4 dwellings within the building, which are shaded grey on the plan, and the existing farmhouse is shown in orange. The application site barn is bound in red on the right-hand side of the plan. And there is an existing solar farm on the eastern side of the development, which I'll show you in the next slide. There's an aerial photo showing the application site building in the central part of the photo, just above the red circle. It's the building above that. The building with the red circle is an existing livery yard, and the other residential development can be seen to the west of the site. This is the agricultural barn in question, and it has been considered capable of conversion by the planning inspector previously, and as part of previous application schemes. Sorry, that's a bit of a fuzzy photo, but the photo shows the relationship with the barn to the left, which is the application site. The central part of the site shows a clamp, an agricultural feature for feeding animals, and then on the right-hand side is some of the existing residential or previous agricultural barn that's already been converted. This photo, I'm stood with my back to the barn, which is subject to the application, the public right-of-way I'm stood on, and then you can see the solar farm in the distance, just setting out the context of the site. Again, this is a bit of a clearer photo of the land. In front of you would be the rear garden area of the development, with the existing agricultural barn in front of you that's already been converted, and you can just see the roof and chimney of Bedborough farmhouse itself, the original dwelling on the site. So this plan shows the layout for the previously refused scheme, which was dismissed at appeal for 4 dwellings. And just to note, you can see the, I don't know if my arrow, can you see my arrow on the, yeah. So on this application, the residential amenity area, the private garden area, was on this side of the dwelling, with this area open, and the parking area, and the inspector concluded that this encroached into and adversely affected the openness of the green belt. The current proposal, I'll show you in a while, has altered that relationship and reduced the amount of development proposed. So this plan, following the inspector's appeal, the applicant came in and tried to address the inspector's concerns by reducing the amount of development to 2 dwellings, but they maintained a design which was not particularly sympathetic with the rural character, and also they maintained the gardens in the more open area of the site here, and with all the parking here, and that application was also refused due to its impact on the greenbelt. And there's just an example of the elevational treatment of the buildings, which did cause one of the reasons for refusal on the dismissed appeal. The current site plan shows that the orientation of the buildings have now shifted, and this application has had regard to the conclusions reached by the inspector and has also addressed the previous reasons for refusal on the more recently refused scheme for 2 dwellings. The principle of development is considered in more detail on page 99 of your agenda report. But in relation to the previous reasons for refusal, the development has been amended with the reorientation of the living space for the dwellings, which has been reversed. So where I showed you a previous photo which showed the sort of agricultural feature there, a feeding sort of station there, and the existing residential development, the rear garden area will now be contained here. There's a more informal parking area adjacent to the public right of way, and nothing is proposed in this element here, which again removes the visual impact when looking from the green belt. By positioning the rear garden areas in this new location, they would sit in a more enclosed setting, framed by buildings already converted, and in a space which is currently used for open storage and the agricultural paraphernalia, which I showed you on a previous photo. Proposed curtilage plan. There was previously concern about the size of the red line boundary, so the applicant and agent have provided a curtilage plan which shows a very tight curtilage around the existing built form, showing the garden areas clearly defined between existing built form, and therefore the impact of this change to residential would not have a greater impact on openness than the existing situation. Existing elevation plans, again, I've shown you photos previously of the barn to be converted. The proposed floor plans, they're the identical layout for the 2 properties. The elevational treatment, the design has been simplified and now appears as a more traditional and sympathetic approach to the rural setting, and well, when compared to the previously refused schemes. The design includes full height shutters. However, there is no ability to control that. So whilst they're there as a feature, and they show on the bottom of the screen how they would look if it was closed, we can't control how often those are opened and closed. So that's just a note. The rear elevation is very similar. And the side elevation, that's right. It's not plugged in. Apologies, everyone.
Yeah, I thought this one then probably. Yeah, I thought that one was.
Sorry, thank you. Yeah, that's perfect. Thank you very much. Apologies. Not meant to bite me. Sorry. Yeah, so the side elevation is different. On the application refused by the inspector and also on the previously refused scheme, there was a lot more glazing indicated. This is a much simpler design, and it reflects the previous use of the building, and that's now considered appropriate. So to conclude, the proposal would reuse an existing building and would be appropriate development in the Greenbelt. It would not be isolated given the relationship with other residential development, and the revised scheme has addressed the concerns of both the LPA and the planning inspector, and would now not cause additional harm to openness on the Greenbelt. The proposal would accord with paragraph 150D, and with the proposed conditions restricting additional outbuildings and extensions would not appear as encroachment on the countryside. There are a number of conditions which are set out within the main agenda report, and nothing further to add. The application is recommended for permission, subject to conditions and informatives as set out in the agenda report. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Page, for your report. We have no public speakers on this agenda item. Also on this application, but the agent did request to speak, Mr. Adam Bennett from Kent Park Planning Consultants. However, he's been called away to a planning inquiry, but he did send a statement, which I understand to be read out by Mr. Northover. Mr. Northover.
Thank you, Chairman. From Mr. Adam Bennett of Kent Parks Planning Consultants. Councillors, the application before you seeks planning permission for the change of use and conversion of a single redundant farm building to residential use in the form of detached dwellings. The wider Bedford Farm site houses 5 dwelling houses, the original farmhouse and 4 other dwelling houses, which are the result of the conversion of other redundant agricultural buildings to residential use. The historic agricultural function of the site has ceased, with only the pasture land used for limited agricultural purposes. The farmyard has sat redundant, and over time, the applicant has progressively brought its buildings to a sustainable pattern of reuse in accordance with the planning permissions which have been granted. The barn subject of this application is one remaining building which is now redundant. It is thus considered reasonable and appropriate for the applicant to seek for this building to also be brought into a sustainable pattern of use through conversion. Development seeks only to convert the existing barn building and not to erect any new buildings or structures on site. Your officers consider that there is a conflict with policy KS2 due to the location of the site outside of a defined settlement. However, whilst the development plan is the starting point for considering applications, it is not the end point. And as officers have correctly identified, it is necessary to have regard for other material considerations. In this case, the NPPF is a significant material consideration. The NPPF is clear that the reuse and conversion of existing buildings in the countryside is acceptable, as paragraphs 70 and 80 confirm. Having regard for the judgments of the courts in Braintree and Brownshill, there are clear reasons why the decision, otherwise in accordance with policy KS2, should be taken. It is relevant to note that the local plan is silent on the matter of the change of use of existing buildings to residential use, and thus a decision in accordance with the NPPF should be made. With the local development plan silent on this matter, the presumption in favour of sustainable development applies. In view of this presumption, there are no impacts or harm which significantly or demonstrably outweigh the benefits of development in this case. Development within the green belt is capable of being considered not appropriate development in accordance with the list of exceptions set out in paragraph 150 of the NPPF. Paragraph 150D states in particular that the reuse of buildings, provided they are not permanent and substantial construction, is not inappropriate where the development does not harm openness or the purposes of the green belt designation. The applicant has demonstrated through submitted a detailed structural report that the existing building is a permanent and substantial construction, and this has been confirmed by the planning inspectorate in the recent appeal decision relating to the building. The officer's report discusses in detail the effect of the development upon the openness of the green belt and confirms that through the significant changes made by the applicant when the application before you was submitted, the development will preserve openness and that there are opportunities for landscape and biodiversity enhancements which will positively integrate the scheme into its setting. Officers also confirm that development will not conflict with any of the purposes, including land, within the green belt. Just a short final summary. The Bedford Farm site is already home of a group of residential uses. The proposed development will introduce 2 new dwellings and change the use of the application site to being of a residential character. However, the site has been considerately arranged with the private gardens positioned in an enclosed part of the site, currently used for open storage, and contains redundant agricultural structures, which will be removed. And the converted building will retain a strongly agrarian character as a result of its careful design and material specifications. The development will not impact on the neighbouring residential properties. There are no objections from technical consultees to the proposals. The scheme is of high quality design and will provide a high standard of amenity for future residents. I therefore ask that members support the officer's recommendation, vote planning permission. That's it.
Thank you, Mr. Northover. So if I go to the officer first, if they've got anything they would like to say concerning the statements being made.
Nothing apart from my officer report incorrectly refers to paragraph 11D being engaged, just to say it doesn't, because we have a 5-year housing land supply of 5.3 years, so that part of the report is not correct, but the overall conclusion and recommendation is the same.
Thank you. Okay, members, thank you, Ms. Page. If I now move to any questions or points of clarification from the members. Okay, I've got one myself. I have one myself. So in the prehistory of this application, it talked about possibly moving the right-of-way path. I'm sorry, I didn't take a number of the slide, but you showed the parking area and the right-of-way path on the slide.
Yeah. Right. Yeah, that's got the public right of ways to the right of the slide.
Yeah, thank you. And in the report,
yeah, there was a previous reason for refusal in relation to the public right of way. Yeah, do you want me to respond?
Yeah, no, I was going to ask you about the area. I could see the report just now, and it was about the timber posts that we put in to separate the right of way away from the parking area. I'm just wondering, because you don't have a representation of how that will actually look. It's never a good thing to have the public walking in the same spaces. There's going to be vehicular movement, and I'm just wondering whether those timber posts would be sufficient. Over time they're going to rot and break down anyway, and whether there was the ability to accommodate an earthen bank in that area to ensure that the vehicular movement and the pedestrian traffic on that right of way would be definitely separated, and whether that could be put in as a condition.
I think, well, there are 2 points. One, the public right of way will require, I think the applicant is going to apply to have the public right of way moved slightly, which would address that concern. That is a separate application process, so it's not something that the planning authority deal with, it's the highways authority. The applicant has been involved in discussions with the public right of way team to deal with that. That was also addressed during the planning inspector's decision, and that reason for refusal fell away because it could be addressed post permission. So I totally get your point, and there is a condition in relation to hard and soft landscaping, so we could have a look at the sort of posts that were proposed, but there would be a relationship between pedestrians and traffic, which is the same as the existing situation because it's a working farm. So you do have traffic already using the site and the solar farm. But we could have an informative to make people, an informative note could go on advising the applicant to be aware of that relationship and that the public right of way matter would need to be resolved as part of the highway works.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Page. Yeah, certainly I would like an informative note. If you could just come to this name is Mr. Grover. When or if I should go before the other committee to look at that right of way, would they be able to insist on that being put in, that preventative measure from vehicle traffic encroaching into the space to be used by the public and the public footpath?
Sorry, Tim, could you, I'm not quite sure I picked up the precise point that you were after. Do you mind just restating it and then I can advise? Thank you.
Certainly. So if we were to give an informative note that we would want an earthen bank a small one, a low one, to be put into that position to ensure that the vehicular traffic didn't encroach into the area that's being used by the public in the public right of way. And that there is the possibility that path can be possibly moved later. While we do this as an informative vote within this committee, is there the ability in the committee that will then sit later to look at that public footpath that they could insist that their vote was put in? I remember my regular 2 days.
Is this a planning act diversion?
Sorry, can I just come in? I don't think that a fund would be, well, it's not required to make the development acceptable in planning terms because there isn't a conflict over and above what is already apparent on site. So you've already got vehicular traffic moving along in the area, serving the existing farm buildings and the solar farm. So whilst I understand your concerns, I am not sure that it's necessary as part of this development. However, the public right of way is going to be moved, which is a separate process. So what we could do is let the applicant know of the concerns of the committee and the fact that there was a concern about the conflict between vehicular traffic and pedestrians.
Thank you, Paige. There's only one that's informed vote, Mr. Craig.
Thank you, Chairman. So just to round it off, there would be another application needed to move the path as a result of the development, but that process couldn't be used to pick up something which wasn't a planning consideration. So the informative note is the only mechanism that you've got. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm happy with that. Okay. Any other members wish to speak? Mr. Brenton.
This is not a question, it's sort of a question. It says that, I mean, it's always with these barn conversions, they put to be a substantial or permanent structure. We're talking about a few metal posts and corrugated asbestos roof. When's the breakdown between a substantial barn suitable for conversion and not?
That is a very good point. The original scheme, so the one that went to appeal, we as a local authority had recommended for refusal, one of the grounds being the not substantial nature of the barn. The inspector felt that the structural reports provided with the application and his site visit indicated that it was suitable of reuse. So we have the inspector's decision on that, and the structural report is the same, and the building is of the same quality as it was when the inspector considered the scheme.
Mr. Brenton, you happy with that answer?
No, but
it is what it is, I'm afraid. Okay, members, I've got nobody else wishing to speak, so I'm going to move to the vote. So, I'm sorry, I'm not going to move to the vote, I'm going to move for somebody to propose it. Councillor Gorringe.
I'm happy to propose as set out by the officer
in the report. Thank you. Have a seconder, please. Councillor Morgan.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I've seen enough barn conversions to assure myself that this will probably follow the usual course. So I will second the proposition.
And can I just confirm that both the proposer and the seconder are happy to accompany for the proposal to accompany that or to include that in the note? Thank you. Right, members, if I go to the vote now, please, all those in favour?
Three.
And all those against?
Three.
Thank you, members. Should we just dance for a bit?
Three against.
You've got to do some work sometimes.
So, Chairman's cast and vote. I go with the officer recommendation. Proposals on the table. Thank you, members.
Yeah, just for the purposes of the webcasting, I'll confirm the voting. in being proposed by Councillor Gorringe and seconded by Councillor Morgan. 3 votes for, 3 votes against, and the chairman used his casting vote to go for and 3 against. Thank you.
It was not it's been a long morning. Okay, members, I'm going to move to agenda item 6, urgent items. You'll be relieved to hear there aren't any. So at this point, can I thank members for their input in the committee meeting this morning, which is now the afternoon, and thank officers for their input and the work they've done. I'm going to close the meeting at 13:39. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. You're on your money today.
Almost ran out of steam saying that.
Relieved now.